Recall it, please.
That was page 20, right? Page 20, recalling. The next bill, page 20, calendar number 200, substitute for Senate Bill number 317, an act concerning unemployment for striking employees.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I move the acceptance of the Joint Committee's favorable report and passage of the bill.
Will you remark further?
Madam President, this bill generally makes striking workers eligible for unemployment benefits after they've been out on strike for 2 consecutive weeks. Under current law, claimants are generally ineligible for benefits during any week in which their unemployment is due to a labor dispute. This bill lifts that ineligibility after a period of 2 consecutive weeks in which the claimant's unemployment is due to the labor dispute.
Thank you. Will you mark further? Will you remark further? Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President, if we may. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator stand at ease for a moment.
We'll stand at ease.
Madam President.
Senate will come back to order. Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, it seems like, at least for a moment, the Wi-Fi is back up again. And so Senator Kushner was taking the bill out. She has not yet summarized or done her. You did summarize? That was quick. Okay. And so then we will just yield back to Senator Kushner. Thank you.
Thank you. It was, will you remark further on the bill? Senator Sampson? We'll stand at ease. Am I ready? Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move the acceptance. Madam President, the clerk has an amendment, LCO 4615. Will the clerk please call the amendment?
Mr. Clerk, please call the amendment.
LCO number 4615, Senate Schedule A.
Senator Kushner.
Madam President, I move the adoption of the amendment and move to waive the reading. I would seek leave of the chamber to summarize.
Will you remark further?
Thank you, Madam President. This is a change to the effective date of this bill. It would be effective January 1, 2023.
Will you remark further? Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a question for the proponent of the amendment, if I could. I just want to confirm that this amendment does nothing more than push the effective date out for the policy that is contained in the bill. There are no substantive policy changes other than moving the effective date into the future. Is that correct through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. That is correct. There are no other changes except to change the effective date and move it out to January 1, 2023.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer very much. I will support that amendment. The underlying bill, I expect we will have substantive debate upon, but at this point, I am in opposition to the bill, so something that pushes the effective date of it into the future, I should not object to, and I won't. I will be supporting that amendment, and thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you mark further? This is the amendment. Thank you. If there are no more questions, remarks, I will try your mind. Are there any objections? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed? Ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Senator Kushner. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We're here to debate the now amended bill, which is entitled An Act Concerning Unemployment for Striking Employees. It's Senate Bill 249, in case anyone watching wants to look that up on the Connecticut General Assembly website. Unlike most of the bills that I see come through this chamber, the title is actually a very accurate description of what the bill before us does. And I think that's good in this particular case because I see this as a somewhat absurd policy on its face. The idea that we would offer unemployment compensation for striking employees. Normally I spend a lot of time speaking on the floor to kind of dig deeper into what the policy language before us is, but this is a very short bill. I think the substantive language changes are only a couple of sentences in the current statute. I guess what I want to do today is a little different and just point out just how this policy before us is representative or even symbolic of just how far the majority party has gone when it comes to making labor policy for the state of Connecticut. Everywhere we look, the American system that we have all grown up with is under attack. We've all grown up with the notion that to live in this country, we live with freedom to make our own choices, to choose our own path in life, to pursue our happiness, as was written in our Declaration of Independence, the founding document of this great nation. And aside from freedom, we also understand that we have to live with our choices, that there are consequences for our freedom and our personal decision-making. And our employment system has always reflected that value system, which is that, if you worked hard and did a good job, you can improve your quality of life by earning a raise or a better income. And at some point, maybe start your own business and develop and build relationships with those employees. And if you made bad decisions, you didn't show up for work, you were a bad employee, you didn't produce, you could end up not getting a raise. Or worse, you could get fired from your job. And I think for a long time, we all understood that that is a good system, a fair system that rewards people based on merit, that judges people based on the content of their character, their ability, and their effort. And everywhere we look, the notion of fairness is being debated in all of our policies. And I am really, really concerned that the definition of fairness is being altered before our eyes. And it's being done purposefully so to kind of modify what our country is. To me, to be an American means that you are someone who is an independent, free person, who has the freedom to make your own choices in life, to pursue your happiness, as I mentioned, but to make choices on your own. and we're all subject to great success because of the opportunity that is before us, and we are all simultaneously subject to failure because we are responsible for ourselves. In other words, America is a country for grown-ups. It's a country for people who are willing to take the risk that comes with freedom because of the great opportunity that it affords us, but also willing to accept the responsibility for the fact that things don't always go as they are planned. I mentioned that we are debating the notion of fairness. There's another bill we're going to probably debate in this chamber about a fair work week coming up, which I'll have another opportunity to discuss this notion. But to me, fairness means you get what you deserve. That means that if you work hard and you do good things and you are a good person and you treat others respectfully and you do hard work at your job, you are rewarded for that. And you will achieve great things. Consequently, or that's the wrong word, but accordingly, if you don't do good things and you don't work hard, you're not going to succeed and you will fall behind. And I think that's the traditional definition of fairness. I think that's the way we're raised, even in kindergarten. If one student is on time and responds favorably to the teacher's instructions and does their homework, things like this, then they do well. And the kids that don't are disciplined. But today, the word fairness is being altered. The word fairness is now being used to describe any situation that results in inequity between the results of different participants. For me, it's perfectly fair if someone who trains and works hard comes in first in the race and someone who's lazy and who doesn't train comes in last in the race. That's perfectly fair. In fact, that is the definition of fairness for me. And I think that's been the definition in our country for a long time. But there are those, particularly on the political left, that want to redefine fairness to mean any situation where that person who didn't train, who didn't work hard, ends up in a worse position than someone that did. Because they believe that the true definition of fairness means that everyone ends up with the same exact outcome, regardless of their effort and input. And to me, that's not fair at all. And I bring this up because I think this dispute over the definition of fairness is everywhere in politics in 2022. It is everywhere. It is on every subject that there is, whether it is what's happening in education, what's happening in our economy, the rules and regulations that we place on businesses. All of these things that are coming from the left, the majority party in this particular case, in this state, are designed to create fairness in outcomes and not fairness in opportunity. I am still devoted, Madam President, to fairness in opportunity. I want everyone to have the equal chance to achieve greatness. No one should get any special benefit. In fact, I think one of the very first sentences of our state constitution is there are no special benefits for special people. And that's right, Madam President. This bill is absurd. The unemployment compensation system exists in our law for a very specific reason, and that specific reason is to provide benefits to people who become unemployed through no fault of their own. And to be eligible, you also have to be willing to work. And you have to actively be seeking to find work and employment and a paycheck. This bill flies in the face of that, Madam President. This bill says for someone who is actively saying they don't want to work, they deserve to get unemployment benefits. And really, there's not a whole lot more to say about this bill. But I do have some questions, because I do want to flesh out what is contained in the language so that we all know what we're voting on today. So through you, Madam President, the first question I have is that it is clear in the bill that you become eligible for unemployment benefits as a striking employee after 2 weeks of a strike. My question is, would those benefits be retroactive to the first day? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner, prepare yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. There is nothing in this bill about retroactive payment. President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that there's nothing in the bill, which is why I'm asking. I would like clarification on whether or not those payments, once an application is made for unemployment, would be retroactive to the very first day of unemployment, or those payments would begin after the 2 weeks had elapsed. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, there is nothing that suggests that there would be a retroactive payment. This bill does not address that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope that that's satisfactory for legislative intent for the future, because the reason why I asked the question is because it's not explicitly written in the bill, and it should be. It should say in the bill, and it doesn't. It kind of leaves it up to interpretation. But I'm hopeful that going forward, anyone who looks can discover this conversation where the proponent of the bill, the gentle lady, the chairman of the Labor Committee, has indicated that this is not supposed to include retroactivity. I have a follow-up question, Madam President, and that is, who exactly is covered and eligible under this bill? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. The only thing that is changed in the underlying statute is that striking workers who are out on strike for more than 2 weeks are covered by unemployment. There's no change to any other circumstances except to make that change, that they are eligible if they are on strike for more than 2 consecutive weeks. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that. So am I to understand that this bill would provide the unemployment compensation coverage to any striking worker, regardless of cause? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, provided that striking worker was out on strike for at least 2 consecutive weeks. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Well, thank you, Madam President. And again, I don't mean to be redundant, but I'm pretty sure the bill says that there is a requirement that that person is involved in a labor dispute to be eligible. Is that correct? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. It specifically says after a period of 2 consecutive weeks in which the administrator finds the individual's total or partial unemployment is due to the existence of such labor dispute.
Senator Sampson.
And thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer. I was just trying to get what the bill says on the record. In fact, that is the only sentence that changes in the whole language. The bill itself is 5 or 6, or maybe it's actually, no, I'm sorry, it's 9 pages long. But we're only changing that language right there. And I think it's important to spell out exactly what a labor dispute is as a result. Is there a definition for labor dispute through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, I don't see any definition provided for in this bill.
Thank you. Senator Sampson.
Well, thank you, Madam President. So how would the Labor Department or those having to administer the unemployment compensation program make a determination whether someone was eligible without a definition of labor dispute? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't believe there would be any difficulty in determining whether there was a labor dispute. I think that it's pretty clear when workers go out on strike that they're engaged in a labor dispute. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer, except that I don't think that that's very good policy if there's no actual definition of what a labor dispute constitutes. Does this mean if there's any reason whatsoever, someone says they're not feeling into working that day and they're not going to work, would that constitute a striking employee and a labor dispute through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner?
Thank you, Madam President. It already exists that the Labor Department, the Department of Labor, already has to make that determination whether the workers are engaged in a labor dispute in order to apply existing law and existing benefits. And so I think there won't be any problem in the Labor Department making that determination. They've made it in many cases for a very long time. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson?
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate that. I'm quite confident that the folks that work over at the Department of Labor know their job very well. But for the purpose of this debate, for us in this room, for the policymakers having to make a determination whether they're going to vote on this being good policy or not, I think it's important for us to understand what this bill will actually do to our current law. And to me, the term labor dispute is a very important thing. I need to know whether that is a substantive issue or not. If there is some issue where someone is being required to make a substantial change in their current work situation that negatively impacts them, I can understand where someone might say that's a labor dispute. But suppose an employer says, well, we're going to change the color of your uniforms. Is that a reason? Through you, Madam President, would that be sufficient to satisfy the requirement for labor dispute under this language?
Senator Kushner?
Thank you, Madam President. I assume and I believe that the Department of Labor has developed policy over the years to determine what is a labor dispute. And so is it likely that if there was a dispute over clothing and the workers left the job and went on strike over a clothing issue, I think it would be likely they would find that to be a labor dispute. However, I think that what is clear in this bill is that all we are changing is the requirement that the Department of Labor now extend benefits to workers who are engaged in a labor dispute that exists longer than 2 consecutive weeks. And I don't believe that we're changing anything or directing the Department of Labor in any way to change their interpretation of what a labor dispute is. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson?
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer, but respectfully, it has everything to do with this bill. Because this bill is about whether or not we're going to open up unemployment compensation to an entire new class of individuals. And the determining factor is whether or not they have been involved in a labor dispute. So if we cannot define what a labor dispute is, that's a problem. If we are relying on the Department of Labor has developed policies over a number of years, as was just said, I'm not satisfied with that either. I believe it's the duty of this body to determine what that is, or at least reference a federal definition for labor dispute. I think I will do my best to try and save the chairman by suggesting that I think what is being referred to is in federal law in 29 U.S. Code 152-9, where it says the term labor dispute includes any controversy concerning terms, tenure, or conditions of employment, or concerning the association or representation of persons in negotiating, fixing, maintaining, changing, or seeking to arrange terms or conditions of employment, regardless of whether the disputants stand in the proximate relation of employer and employee. And I'll just say that I think the gentle lady was right when she said that they probably would think an employer changing the requirement for the color of uniforms would qualify as a labor dispute, because that is one very broad definition. I asked a few minutes ago whether or not who this applied to, and we just agreed that it applies to striking workers who have been involved in a labor dispute for more than 2 weeks. Is there any requirement, through you, Madam President, that these employees are part of a group? Can this individual employee be a striking employee under this definition? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner?
Thank you, Madam President. This in no way changes the way the DOL would interpret the statute with regard to a labor dispute. So it would be entirely within the Labor Department to determine whether or not there was a labor dispute involved.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Respectfully, it's not what I asked. My question was very specific. Does this have to be more than one person, or can a single individual be involved in a labor dispute and be considered a striking employee and be eligible under this bill? It's a yes or no question. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Under federal law, a labor dispute must involve two or more employees to be considered collective action. However, that is the federal law, and I would imagine that is the way they would apply it here as well.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. So is it your understanding and your testimony that this bill follows that federal law, and it would be two or more people to be eligible under this proposed language, because one person would not be considered a striking employee? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm not here to interpret the federal law, and I am simply stating that the National Labor Relations Act pertains when two or more employees are engaged in collective action. That does not determine whether or not it's a strike. That is simply what the law says. I think there's a tremendous amount of case law on a federal level to determine whether or not workers are engaged in a strike. And I'm not here to interpret that.
Senator Sampson.
And thank you, Madam President. I'm a little frustrated, and I have great respect for the chairman of the Labor Committee, and I understand she's doing the best she can to answer these questions, but I'm not asking difficult questions, and I'm not asking her to interpret federal law. I'm asking basic, simple questions about the policy before us. We are going to ask 36 members of this body, and presumably the House of Representatives, if it passes this chamber, to vote on whether this is good policy or not. We need to be able to tell them what it is. If we can't tell them that this applies to one person, or it's got to be at least two people, or what a labor dispute consists of, then we're not giving them any guidance on whether this is good policy or not. We really ought to be prepared when we come to this chamber to be able to debate these bills and to be able to understand the content well enough to answer the simplest of questions. I'm not looking for some complex, detailed answer to a question that we shouldn't have considered. These are basic questions. Does this apply to one person, or does it apply to more than one person? What is the context of labor dispute? These are basic questions. And it appears, Madam President, from what I'm getting or not getting, that this is an unbelievably broad definition, that it includes any kind of dispute between an employer and employee, anything whatsoever. Controversy concerning terms, tenure, or conditions of employment. That, to me, is everything under the sun. And if that is the narrowest definition, which is what I heard, that they might use the federal definition or they might use something broader, that is beyond unreasonable. There seems to be a presumption that it is the responsibility of the majority party in this legislature to take on the role of the arbiter or advocate for employee organizations. They got their own representation for that. They don't need legislators here for that purpose. Our job is to represent all of our constituents. That's all of them. And that includes not just employees or union labor employees or employers. It includes everyone. And our job is not to put our hand on the scale either. Our job is to make sure that we write good policy that respects the rights of every person. And this bill doesn't respect the rights of every person. This puts a heavy hand of government, the use of force, to say, no, we're going to tip the scale hard in one direction. And we're not even going to let you use collective bargaining for that purpose. We're going to step in and do it for you. We're going to go ahead and say that this body takes the side of labor and is going to put this policy into place. It's wrong, Madam President. It's not what we're here for. Let me ask another question. Labor dispute. we're seeing a whole bunch of labor disputes in the news over the last year. For instance, there's people that don't want to wear masks in their course of their employment, or people that did not want to subject themselves to a COVID vaccine, including state employees. Would that be considered a labor dispute if an employee said, I want to come to work, but I will not submit myself to something that violates my religious beliefs? Would that be considered a labor dispute under this language through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. And I apologize for repeating myself, but I think that all this bill does is it says to the Labor Department, where you previously had to determine whether or not there was a labor dispute in order to deny benefits, this now requires you, in the event where you've determined there's a labor dispute, to pay benefits after 2 consecutive weeks. So that's the only change we're making to the statute. The Labor Department has to make that determination in any case. The only change is that now, after 2 consecutive weeks, if they've made a determination that there's a labor dispute involved, now they will pay benefits under this when we pass this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I did not hear an answer to my question. And I believe it is the responsibility of the chairman of the Labor Committee to know what a labor dispute is. I'm pretty certain under the federal definition, which says the term labor dispute includes any controversy concerning terms, tenure, or conditions of employment, that certainly would constitute a labor dispute. And for legislative intent, I've heard nothing here today that would suggest to me that someone who wanted to say that they are a striking employee because they refuse to accept a COVID vaccination, or anything else for that matter, would not be able to be eligible for these benefits. And I am open to anyone who would like to disagree with me on that subject to please state where in our statute or in this proposed bill that I'm wrong. Another question through you, Madam President. Does this bill make any distinction between those that are striking employees voluntarily or involuntarily? And what I'm getting at is that sometimes when you have a strike, obviously some people were in favor of the strike and some people may not have been. So you got 2 kinds of people that are effectively on strike and not getting paid, at least not by the employer. Does this bill make any distinction for who's eligible through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill only speaks to whether if a labor dispute has been found by the Department of Labor, then those striking workers are eligible for unemployment after 2 consecutive weeks on strike. It does not address anything other than that simple 2 sentences. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Was the question I asked something that should be understood through the language that is in the bill before us, Madam President? Or is there an interpretation other than it includes both voluntary and involuntary employments that somebody could determine based on this language through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. This change in the statute only addresses workers who are on strike for 2 consecutive weeks. When the Department of Labor determines that there's a labor dispute involved, this bill simply changes the terms to say that those persons will receive benefits after 2 consecutive weeks on strike or involved in the labor dispute. It does not address, in this change in this bill, it does not say anything about voluntary or involuntary involvement. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. It's clear I'm not going to get the answers to the questions, which I think are very important for us to make a determination on this policy. These are important questions, ladies and gentlemen. This is not, I'm not asking these questions to be difficult. I'm not asking these questions to be in any way argumentative. I am simply trying to put on the record what this proposed policy language is supposed to do to change our laws. The people in this circle who are going to vote on this deserve to know the answer to that question. And I believe, as the chairman of the Labor Committee, and this being a bill that you are championing today, you must have a position on whether or not voluntary and involuntarily striking workers should be covered by this. And I presume that the bill says one way or the other. I'm reading that it doesn't suggest that only one or the other, and therefore both voluntary and involuntary workers would be covered. Am I reading that wrong through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I think you're reading correctly that it does not address involuntary or voluntary participation. It simply changes the statute to provide that if there's a labor dispute, that any worker involved in that labor dispute for more than 2 consecutive weeks is eligible then for unemployment. I think that it's clear on the face of it. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate you saying it's clear on the face of it. That would mean that we should be able to have an answer on the face of it when I ask, yes or no, is something covered? So there you have it. Voluntary striking workers are covered. Not just involuntary workers. I could almost get my arms around the idea that if you got caught up in a labor dispute and you ended up on strike because your fellow employees went on strike, even though you voted no against the strike, you're still out of a job. I could almost get my arms around that somehow you might be entitled to unemployment benefits. But for the people that are actively participating in the strike, they are walking off the job. They're saying, we're not going to work. We have a job right there. We can go to work and we can get paid. We might not like the terms. But this is an at-will state. I didn't even touch one of the most important components of this bill, which is the experience rating issue. You know what this bill will do, Madam President? This bill is going to open up employers who have striking workers to be responsible for paying higher premiums for unemployment compensation insurance. And anyone who knows this issue knows that our unemployment compensation fund in this state is bankrupt. We borrowed $1 billion with a B, $1 billion, to keep our unemployment compensation fund afloat last year. $1 billion. And now we have a bill before us that says that striking workers who are voluntarily walking off the job will be eligible for unemployment, and that employer is now not only going to have striking workers, but their unemployment is going to affect their experience rating. I have not seen something this absurd since maybe a week ago, the last time I was in this room. I don't have much more to say, Madam President. I just want to bring us back to the beginning, which is that the unemployment compensation program in the state of Connecticut exists for a good purpose. It exists to aid and assist residents of Connecticut who lose their job through no fault of their own. That's what it's for. It's not for people who walk off the job. It's not for people who are not looking for work. It's not for people who believe they deserve a paycheck without working. That's not what it's for. Our system rewards people that want to work. That's how our system works. This does exactly the opposite. Clearly, when the unemployment compensation system was first enacted in the state of Connecticut, no one considered the idea that someone that left their job voluntarily in a strike would be eligible for that compensation. No one thought of that. It's absurd on its face. And it's very simple, Madam President. If you think it's a good idea to reward people for walking off the job with no desire to work with unemployment compensation at the expense of other taxpayers in the state, of employers that are offering employment, and other people that legitimately deserve unemployment compensation, then you vote yes. But if you believe in actual fairness, the kind I was talking about before, where we reward people for hard work and merit, then you vote no. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further? Senator Champagne.
Thank you, Madam President. This legislation kind of bothers me. Over the last couple of years, all I keep seeing is the pendulum, which should be down the middle when you're negotiating contracts, keeps shifting towards the workers. This one is even worse. This one says if an employee is negotiating a contract and goes on strike because they don't like the way it's going, if they're on strike for 2 weeks, they can collect unemployment at the expense of the employer. That is crazy. I was going to ask questions, but I can see that we're not going to get any answers to any of those questions, so I'm not going to ask any today. I'm just going to make a statement that this is an anti-business bill. I think we're going to see more before the session ends. And it's a shame. We lost a lot of businesses under COVID. The experience rating for businesses went up through the roof. In fact, I'm getting complaints that the Labor Department right now is doing those experience ratings on the year 2019. And some of those businesses had a high number in 2019. So it's not spread over a couple of years. And that's concerning to me. But here, if the employees say, hey, I want a 50% raise, the employer says no. They go on strike. They're on strike for 2 weeks. They can collect unemployment for who knows. We prepared a law that doesn't have answers, saying that, well, the Labor Department makes those decisions. But who guides them? Is it federal law? Or do they make it up as they go along? That answer wasn't given to us today either. Somebody from the other side said to me when I asked them, how could you vote for that? And they said to me, 50% of our vote comes from the unions. And if they ask for it, we give it to them. That's where I see this coming from. That's where I see it. During the election process, I see large numbers of union people, union members, going out knocking doors. This has got to be part of the repay of that, as well as many other things I see. This is disturbing. This is disturbing. It's anti-business. And it actually puts the employer at a disadvantage in the negotiation table. And this isn't just the employer. I can see municipalities falling under the same thing. So it's the taxpayers. The taxpayers are going to be left holding the bag again. It's been said before that, we keep doing more and more, and it keeps hurting our taxpayers over and over again. This makes no sense where this came from, except a handout. That's what I see this as. And it's a shame. It's a shame that we continue to treat our businesses like this, like they're the enemies and they have just a large amount of money and can continue paying this. I've been contacted by several businesses about this, and they're concerned because they're already paying such high rates for unemployment. And the fact that we can't even define how many people it takes if two people decide that, you know what, I know I got hired to work Saturday, I just don't want to work anymore. So, this is a labor dispute. Let's go out for 2 weeks and start collecting. If it's not defined in statute, then somebody's defining it somewhere. And if it's the Labor Department, where are they getting their definition from? That's where I'm going to leave it at. This is a concerning piece of legislation here, and I think it's a giveaway. Thank you.
Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon. I'm going to be brief, but I just wanted to rise. I'm listening to the discussion and the notion that this bill doesn't make sense It's nonsense. It's anti-business. I hear a lot of that in this building, in this chamber. Anytime a bill is proposed that some people don't like, we could flip that and say that what they're saying is anti-worker, but I wouldn't. I think what is in front of us is a proposal that is trying to do something that I think, whether you agree with it or not, the notion behind it actually does make sense. Now, you can disagree with it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense, right? So the strike, the ability of a worker to strike, is what preserves the ability of that worker and the group of workers that they are part of to bargain and to get to the place where our laws suggest that they should be able to be. The reason that they are allowed to bargain is to be able to move. Now, the boss, the business, is not disadvantaged by the fact that the worker can strike, the fact that the worker can bargain. That's part of the process. But if they don't have the ability to do that in effect, which some of them don't have the ability to do, given the way that this actually plays out, then having that right doesn't actually mean anything. And it seemed that the notion among some of my colleagues is that workers just walk off the job and they're happy to do that because it's going to give them what they desire. I've never seen that. I work in a labor context. I'm a senator. I was a representative. I've seen this at various places. I haven't seen people just walk off the job because that's going to give them the pay they want, the vacation they want, whatever. That's just not how it works. And I've actually, in the labor context, watched the struggle to talk about whether or not there should be a strike, whether or not there should even be protest. Forget striking, there should even be protest, because there are repercussions for those things. And when it comes to striking, one of the repercussions is that it may have impact financially on the family and your ability to do the things that you want to do. So look, I recognize that people have different perspectives on this. I think that we should also recognize that there is a real, valid reason why this discussion should be entertained, why we should be thinking about this. Whether we ultimately pass it through this chamber and the chamber downstairs is a different question. But I think that there is a real reason why this is a conversation that we engage, and it's not just a payback. It is because there are workers in the state of Connecticut who don't have the ability, though many may think they do, don't have the ability, because of the implications of doing so, to access that thing which we say is a right of the worker. And doing it in this way, doing what this policy entails, would ensure that they actually have that right. So I just wanted to put that on the record, because I'm hearing people suggest that they're just giveaways. I wouldn't vote on this if it was just a giveaway. I would vote on this if I believed that the policy actually enforced the ability of people to access their right, which I do, which is why I will be voting for it. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further? Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. And I heard a lot of discussion over the last maybe hour or so, and there were some questions, statements, and I'm confused myself, and I'm in this building sitting in this circle, so I know that people may be watching or paying attention to this legislation are also extremely confused. And I come from a diverse labor background. My father's a union president. I was in a union as a corrections officer. I do believe that there is a place for a union, and they do good work for the people that they represent at times. I'm a small business owner of a few small businesses and understand the struggles that we have in Connecticut to get people to go to work. I was recently at a roundtable discussion on workforce development with a lot of people from the Department of Labor, small business owners, big corporations, hospitals, and we have a serious problem of fulfilling the amount of opening positions there are in so many important fields across so many professions. And I'm concerned that this may add to the problem that we're having and compound this problem that much more. And I'm going to attempt to ask some questions to try to get to the bottom of this that I have being here, and I would assume some of my constituents are going to have. Through you, Mr. President, I have a couple of questions for the proponent of the bill.
Senator Kushner, prepare yourself. Senator Ciccarella, prepare. You may frame your question.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. President, is this only directed towards union employees?
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner, would you care to respond?
This bill would involve any workers involved in a labor dispute, and I believe the Department of Labor has the ability and has in practice determined what is a labor dispute over many decades. And I know that workers can engage and form a union and withhold their labor power under federal and state law. They can also do that without a union. So this bill does not address whether or not they have to have a union affiliation. That would be a determination whether or not it was a labor dispute that would be made by the Department of Labor, as they have done for decades, at least.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. And it's my understanding that there's certain unions that can't strike, if I'm not mistaken, that there's union guidelines or bylaws that would allow certain union members of certain union groups to not strike. Would this allow them to strike through you, Madam or Mr. President?
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, this bill does not broaden any of our state or federal laws to allow workers that are now prohibited from striking. It does not broaden those laws in any way. It does not address them. It does not speak to them. So workers who are now prohibited by law from engaging in strikes are still prohibited. This bill doesn't address that at all.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. And just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, so there are certain unions that represent a large group of people that have a no-strike guideline. And that large group cannot strike, but a small package store that employs 8 people, those 4 of the 8 individuals can strike for a dispute. Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. The law doesn't designate unions that are not allowed to strike. It does prohibit some employees from having the right to strike. So state employees in the state of Connecticut do not have the right to strike, for example. So the prohibition on striking is based on the workers themselves and the work they perform, not the unions.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. To the second part of that question, so the 4 package store employees in this scenario that I'm saying, there's 8 of them, 4 of them, not in a union, strike for a dispute. Those 4 employees, after 2 weeks, could collect unemployment from the package store company.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
To my knowledge, there's no prohibition for a small business, a package store that has 4 employees. There's no prohibition on the right of those workers to engage in collective action.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
And therefore, because of a dispute, they decide not to go to work, and we'll try to figure out a type of dispute that a small business owner may get in with their employees in a minute. But for the 4 individuals to not be happy about a decision or change, or for whatever dispute, they can collect unemployment, and that would again essentially go against the employer's unemployment insurance rating. Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, if employees engage in a labor dispute for at least 2 consecutive weeks, they would then be eligible for unemployment based on this bill.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarello.
Thank you. And through previous discussion, I was hearing back and forth of trying to get an understanding of what a dispute may be. I guess the first question to really try to understand this, and so my constituents watching and that are concerned about this could understand, is there a difference between a regular dispute between myself and maybe Senator Minor next to me, or a labor dispute through you?
Thank you, Senator Ciccarello. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. The language of this proposed bill is very clear that it must be a labor dispute.
So,
Go ahead. Proceed.
thank you. Sorry, thank you. And through you, so if I had just a dispute with Senator Minor, what changes a dispute when it becomes related to labor? I'm trying to ask this question to really get a good understanding of how 4 employees in that scenario that I just talked about could walk off and still get paid at the expense of the employer. So can you tell me what a labor dispute is compared to an average dispute that I may have with a colleague or a friend of mine through you, Mr. President?
Thank you, Senator Ciccarello. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe that the Department of Labor currently must interpret our statutes to determine whether or not a labor dispute exists. This bill does not change that determination in any way. This bill simply says that after 2 weeks of after workers are engaged in a labor dispute for 2 consecutive weeks, they would be eligible for unemployment. So this would really be a question that the Department of Labor would make that determination as they have for many, many decades. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ciccarello.
Through you, Mr. President, can you, since they've been making the determination for so long, give me an example, one example of a labor dispute? Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarello. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can think of many examples of labor disputes that have resulted in workers being out on strike. I think the one that comes to mind most recently was the dispute between the employees of Stop and Shop and their employer, the union employees of Stop and Shop and the employer.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarello.
Thank you. And through you, I'm not familiar with that dispute. What was the specific dispute about? Was it pay? Was it health benefits? Was it working more hours? Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarello. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe that I'm in a position to opine on what the dispute was between that employer. I was simply stating I know that there was a strike. I think we're all pretty familiar with it. It was in the news quite a bit when the Stop and Shop workers in Connecticut went out on strike. But as to the particulars that led to that strike, it was part of the negotiations process that broke down, and thankfully it was resolved rather quickly. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarello.
Thank you. For the purpose of assuming, and I was told really never to do that, but we know what labor is, and we know what a dispute is. A dispute, a definition of a dispute, is a debate, an argument, a disagreement, a controversy. In small business, that happens every day. At my business today, I'm sure there is many disputes between management staff, the owners, and the rank and file. And this is alarming that without an exact understanding of what a dispute can be, that can authorize someone to walk off of a job and still get paid, you know, I'm thinking now as a small business owner, and it literally just made me stop my original thought and think how much trouble my small business would be in if this passes and half of my staff don't want to go to work. And I say, hey guys, you have to, I don't know, recycle the paper. And they say they don't want to recycle. That is a labor dispute. And I'm going to have to pay more unemployment. And now, to the point of this whole thing that I started with about the problem that we have in Connecticut and all across the United States, is finding workers to fill jobs that are needed to make sure everybody's everyday life could continue normally and the small business owners could put food on their families' tables. They could just walk off and get paid. We need to encourage people to go to work. I completely understand the value in representation for labor and making sure employees have a voice and they have some sense of ability to fight what they think is right or just for them to go to work. But this is tying the hands of small businesses that are already struggling to keep their doors open. And I'm not saying 4 out of 8 liquor store employees are lazy, but if they choose to not go to work and they realize that they could just have an argument over the color of their uniform, doesn't match their lipstick today, that is a dispute. It's related to labor, and then they don't have to go to work. And I just think that the negative consequences of this legislation is going to do more negative for our small businesses than positive for the employees of the state of Connecticut. As I said before, my father's a union president, and I wanted clarification on if they could strike, how they strike, and he was perplexed by the amount of disputes that he hears. He's a union president, and some individuals agree with each other. So if there's 50 people, 3 or 4 people may be upset about something, and therefore it's a dispute, and they bring it to their union delegate or to the president. And most of the time, the mass majority would say, listen, let's talk about this. That doesn't make sense. There's a catch safe, if you will, for the group of individuals that this union works for, whether it's a municipality, a stop and shop. There's a way for there to be a negotiation with a union, and they could talk some sense maybe into some employees or members of that union. But when you have a small business, it has to be 2 people, from my understanding, to be upset about a dispute, and then they can just leave the job. In your opinion, through you, Mr. President, do you think this is going to negatively affect small businesses in the state of Connecticut?
Thank you, Senator Chigarella. Senator Kushner.
In my opinion, thank you, Mr. President. In my opinion, I don't think this is going to be a problem for small businesses. I think most small businesses, in fact, do work through disputes that they have, day-to-day problems with their employees. My dad was a small businessman. He never had employees walk off the job, and it wasn't because of whether or not they were entitled to unemployment. There are very few strikes that have occurred in this country. In fact, there have only been 2 strikes of any size in our state over the last 21 years that have lasted more than 2 weeks. So workers don't go out on strike, I think it was mentioned earlier, just because they feel like it. It is a really serious issue that takes deep consideration. I've been involved in the labor field I was involved for more than 40 years. And in that time, very few times did the workers that I represented choose to take a strike, because in fact, they were usually able to work through the problems. And that is the norm. 98% of contract negotiations are resolved without strikes in our country. So I don't think that this is a situation where workers are going to just start striking now because they might be able to get unemployment. I think that is actually ludicrous. I can't even imagine it. Because in fact, workers have good relationships with their boss in most cases. And I think that's true especially in small businesses. And that's just my opinion, but you asked for it, so thank you, and through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you for your opinion. I do appreciate that. And through you, with another question, you mentioned 98% of strikes that are heard get resolved prior to a strike from happening. Was that correct that I heard that?
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, 98% of contract negotiations are resolved without strikes.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
How many of those 98% are small businesses? Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ciccarella. Senator Kushner.
I don't have an exact figure. I can tell you in my experience, very few businesses, very small businesses are unionized. There are some, and it has happened in the past, but I wouldn't have any way of giving you figures on that. Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you, and I know that was a tough question and hard to answer. Just trying to understand, if there's been strikes at small businesses, are you familiar, through you, Mr. President, of any small business or medium business that's not unionized that had a strike? Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, I'm not aware of any in the state of Connecticut.
Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. And another question through you, Mr. President. We talked about the Department of Labor determining what is a labor dispute. So with that in mind, I'm just going to try to make a quick example of how we would determine if a dispute that would make people walk off of a job to be able to be ruled by the Department of Labor if this is in fact a labor dispute or a disagreement. I would say, I almost said union, but no, this is just labor because they're not unionized. Small business, and a few individuals walk off of a job. How long would it take for the Department of Labor to determine that this is in fact a labor dispute? Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe I can answer that question. I think that would be up to the Labor Department to tell us, but I would imagine they would make that determination relatively quickly.
Senator Ciccarella.
Thank you. I'm sitting here and I'm just perplexed by the amount of issues that I see with this just as a small business owner and what this could do for my businesses and people in my district's businesses. We talked about we have not seen a lot of strikes in small businesses, and we don't hear about that. But every day, you're right, there's different disagreements between business owners and their employees, and they do the best they can to work them out to come to a resolution. But if there's an incentive to not go to work because the dispute is something that just simply an employer cannot do, like, hey, we don't want to work Fridays and every day that it's sunny, they can walk off the job and after 2 weeks be paid. I could see a lot of issues, and I've seen a lot of things both in my professional working career as a union law enforcement officer, as a small business owner, but more importantly, in a loss prevention perspective in my small business, where we see, unfortunately, employees sometimes steal, sometimes do things that are wrong. And sometimes there's not great employers, and I get that. But we're going to create an avenue for people to get paid to not go to work, and we need to incentivize people to go to work. And I think this is a step in the opposite direction. I have more questions to try to make examples for specific incidents that I could see arising in a small business in my district. for the sake of time, I'm just going to say I strongly oppose this, and I think we really need to think long and hard what we're going to do to the workforce of the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Further on passage? Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today because the top priority of this body and the state government at the current time must be to create good jobs for as many families as possible and make Connecticut more affordable. I think to that end, this bill absolutely clearly fails in achieving that goal. That must be the top priority of Connecticut state government, foremost because we face an affordability crisis and because we failed to create jobs in Connecticut over a long period of time and continue to fail to do so today. As we speak, Connecticut has the seventh highest unemployment rate in the country, and since before the pandemic, we have the 8th lowest level of job growth in the continental U.S. That, in large degree, is because of the policies of this state government, which make it inordinately expensive to live here and make it extraordinarily difficult on small businesses and medium-sized businesses to create jobs for workers here. It's, I think, something that the average person in each of our districts pretty commonly understands. It's difficult to create jobs here. It is difficult to afford to live in this state, and it is in a large degree because of the tax and regulatory policies of this state government. But we should also look, as we attempt to achieve a better economy for this state, look to the examples, both the positive and the negative, set by other states. As far as I understand, the state of New York is the best comparable policy comparison to this bill proposed before us today for a, shall we say, highly permissive unemployment benefit arrangement for striking workers. They recently amended it at the end of 2019, or they sent it to the governor at the end of 2019 to permit unemployment benefits to be given to striking employees just a week, I think just 7 days after they initiate a strike. So New York is our best comp to this bill, and it's extraordinarily rare from other states to even have a policy that even begins to consider a policy as is contained in this bill. New York, since the end of 2019 to today, has seen the largest loss in jobs and payrolls of any state in the continental U.S. The only state that trails it is Hawaii. New York is an economic basket case by almost any measure. It's too expensive, the taxes are too high, it's corrupt, it's extraordinarily difficult for small businesses to operate, and so on and so forth. And because of that, they have lost the most jobs of any state in the continental U.S. since around the time that a policy extraordinarily similar to the one before us today was passed into law. So we should ask ourselves, do we want to follow New York on its path to economic malaise and unaffordability? In my part of the state, we welcome residents from New York who are fleeing the economic and otherwise crisis situation that is befalling that state. We welcome them into southwestern Connecticut, and we say, please do not bring the policies of your state with you, although in some cases Connecticut's policies are already somewhat similar to New York's. But New York, by many measures, is the only state with higher taxes than Connecticut, and in some cases the only policies more restrictive to economic growth than Connecticut. So please do not bring the policies of New York to Connecticut, but that's exactly what this bill does. If we pass a policy like this, it creates more stress on an unemployment fund that is already insolvent. That's exactly why a former state senator and the current commissioner of labor in this state has expressed concern about this bill. There is already in excess of $420 million of debt in our unemployment fund. We've already exhausted federal resources in order to cover some of those losses. So the rest of the losses will fall likely on the general fund or on small and medium-sized businesses through their unemployment taxes that they face. They already currently pay in excess of $500 per worker for unemployment taxes, which makes it more difficult for them to pay higher wages to their existing employees or create new jobs for future employees. Now we have a bill before us that will exacerbate the liability, exacerbate the crisis that already exists in our unemployment fund when it's already stressed, creating a liability on existing taxpayers, making it more uncertain for workers who might actually need, in a fair case, to draw upon that unemployment fund. And so from that standpoint, I think a policy like this would be completely unreasonable and irresponsible. So we already have people in the state government on both sides of the aisle sounding the alarm that our unemployment fund is in crisis, it's insolvent, it's creating a risk for our economy and for our workers and for our taxpayers. And so a bill like this should be very, very cautiously considered and approached. So if that current insolvency in our unemployment fund needs to be covered entirely by existing businesses and employers through their unemployment taxes, which of course is ultimately paid by the worker in the form of lower wages and fewer jobs, then if you do the simple math, we would see a 20-25% increase in the amount of unemployment taxes paid per worker through their employer, which will again reduce the number of jobs, reduce long-term wages. If this bill stood any chance of improving things in the long run for workers, for middle-class workers, for working-class workers, for workers in unions, then I would have to think twice about the bill. But I have absolutely zero doubts that this will harm the economic well-being in the long run of our families, of our workers, of the middle class in Connecticut. It will especially make things difficult for people in working class jobs, lower middle income jobs, or people in unions where the presumed risk of this policy will lie in our economy. The Fazios come from a long line of unionized workers, of construction workers going back generations in New York. So if I thought a bill would be destructive to the ends faced by working class, middle class, unionized workers, then it would, I believe, be my responsibility to speak out against it, to oppose it. And I certainly think this bill falls into that category as harming their long-term being. The unemployment insurance program in our state and any other state in the country is an important program that provides resources for people who are temporarily down on their luck. The statute in our state says that the unemployment insurance program is a provision for people experiencing, quote, unemployment through no fault of their own. Unemployment through no fault of their own. It's fair, we have determined as a society and as a state, to provide resources for people who are down in their luck, bad circumstances, layoffs, resignation for cause, etc. This policy would completely flip that paradigm on its head. It would provide unemployment benefits through taxes on the general public for people who voluntarily choose to go off the job. We already have a paradigm where we can bargain, where we can negotiate, where we can achieve higher wages in the long run. This upends the fairness of that relationship. And so, ultimately, it can be expected to destroy jobs and to reduce wages for people in need in the long run. If this were a fair paradigm, if this could even possibly improve the lot of people it's intended to help, then I would have to consider it. But as it is, there is no doubt in my mind that this policy or policies like this will further reduce economic opportunity in Connecticut, will kill more jobs, will reduce long-term wages. and therefore I urge all of my colleagues to oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Minor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have to say that as I look back on my time in the legislature, one of the assignments that I always found most challenging was the Labor Committee. Not because I couldn't relate to both sides of the issues on the Labor Committee, but because it really caused me to dig deep and think about the implications of what we were doing. Some of them were pretty simple, most of them were not. And as Senator Fazio just said, some of them actually kind of flipped the coin. So if that's where we are, and that's where we think we should be, my question is, why now? Why in the face of everything we've been through over the last 2 years? And what is the effect going to be? And so when I think about the change in language, and I think Senator Fazio is quite right, the intention of this in its simplest form is to allow those that we generally associate with being subject to labor disputes, and more often than not organized labor, this actually widens the horizon on that scenario to the infinity of 2 employees. So that we're clear, this is not reserved, and perhaps labor disputes never were, but the presumption was that in most cases, based on the rules as we knew them, labor disputes generally occurred in their larger capability as part of disagreements between business, employers, and employees that are generally associated with organized labor. And so when we change this situation, there is no doubt in my mind that it is going to have a significant effect on a number of things. As the President rightly pointed out, there are certain circumstances where people may have never been in a position to have these conversations with their employer, and this provides them that opportunity. I would also say that it's going to provide the Department of Labor with an extraordinary opportunity to get involved in a lot of labor disputes that never came to the Department of Labor. When I look at the fiscal note, which I often do, there's no doubt in their mind that this is going to have an impact. The workload is going to change within the Department of Labor. And that makes me think, I wonder what the normal small business would have to do to answer what might be required from the Department of Labor once a labor dispute has been filed with the Department of Labor. So if I use Senator Ciccarella's situation, where you have an employer of 6 employees, that person has never probably had to deal with the Department of Labor concerning a labor dispute. They've successfully managed to put up every poster, handed out every leaflet, established every policy that we've ever directed them to do, and now you get a disagreement about wages or vacation. Not insignificant. Those are significant issues on both sides of that argument, that conversation. But I pretty much know that the vast majority of small businesses in the 30th District have never been the subject of a labor dispute before the Department of Labor. So I'm sure there's paperwork. I wouldn't be shocked if there was a hearing. I wouldn't be surprised if they had to engage an attorney. Again, could be over a subject matter as simple and as important as wages. But that's what we're going to do here today. We are going to significantly change the understanding of who is eligible for unemployment and when and how. Mr. President, when I think about again, what has occurred in the last 2 years when we all around this circle said, we think that this situation with COVID is so significant, we need to be able to act swiftly, with one voice, with the consideration of leadership, and we need to be able to react or act. And one of the first things we did was put the key in the door of this building and the building next door, because it was too dangerous. And the governor put in place a policy that sent everybody home. Whenever I was asked, I supported it. I don't think we knew who was going to get sick next, and we certainly didn't know who was going to survive and who wouldn't. But the bill to do that had to fall on someone's desk. I remember the governor. We're going to take care of this. We are with you. We are going to be there, and we are going to help. And in the first budget that came out during COVID, there was not nickel one until this body and the chamber downstairs put money in that budget, $155 million, I think, of a $1 billion debt to the federal government in the budget. To our credit, I think we were trying to deal with an issue that we had heard and that we were hearing from our constituents, small business owners, that were looking at the prospects of hiring people back and wondering what their unemployment tax rate was going to look like, knowing that this debt had accrued over a period of 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. And it wasn't their fault. They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't bring the virus here. But that tax has been left on every business in the state of Connecticut. Whether you hired anybody, whether you laid anybody off, whether you kept your current workforce. And just so there's no misunderstanding, the budget that we're currently discussing doesn't have 50 cents in it for the purpose of paying down that debt. The governor didn't have it in there, and neither does the budget that came out of the Appropriations Committee. So what are we going to do? What are we doing today? April 13th. What we're doing today is we're going to make that situation worse. Not better. We're going to make it worse. We haven't heard the pleas from the business community saying, please, let us get our feet underneath us. We're going to make it worse. We're going to subject small businesses that have never, probably ever, had a communication from the Department of Labor that they're now involved in a labor dispute. And by the way, the 2 people out of 6 are on strike. And to make matters even better, you're going to owe them unemployment in 2 weeks. That's not going to help anything. It may further some of these conversations. And to Senator Kushner's credit, I think she acknowledged that most small businesses actually do work things out with their employees. But this is going to change the paradigm. People will certainly be able to hold out a little longer. I don't know about you folks, I'm hearing from hospitals in the northwest corner that can't hire an ER nurse or an intensive care nurse for less than $200 a day because they don't exist. The Hospital Association is telling me that they every day are on the phone with the Department of Labor and the Department of Public Health trying to get people credentialed. I don't understand why. I don't understand how. I appreciate that everything deserves a conversation. But now, at this time, with not one nickel in that budget to help small business pay down the debt, they did nothing, and I think we would all agree they did nothing wrong. Yet that tax is theirs. So I really don't believe I see anything in this that I can warm up enough to support. I think it does dramatically change the circumstances in the state of Connecticut. And I guess if I could for a moment go back to a conversation with Senator Eileen Daley, who came from a family much like many of the people that have spoken here today, strong, strong union beliefs. And I remember her telling me a story about her father. His shop was on strike, and he knew what the employees wanted, he knew what the employer could afford, and he was urging settlement, and they ultimately striked, and he was furious. Because at the end of the day, he thought that shop was going to leave Massachusetts. And if I understood her correctly, that is exactly what happened within 3 years. So we can talk about how unbalanced things may be today. I think there's a lot written, maybe it's only 3 lines in this bill, but it is going to significantly change the dynamic here in the state of Connecticut, and I think it's something that we should not be supporting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Minor. Senator Berthoud.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good to see you. I rise in opposition to the legislation before us at the moment, the proposed legislation. You know, I've been listening to the dialogue all afternoon, or since we started this a couple of hours ago, and I guess maybe I'll repeat some of what's already been said, but my understanding from having belonged to, worked for employers where I had to be part of a union, for being on the management side of employers where we had unionized employees, is that employees who are in a bargaining unit are in contracts with their employer that describe their relationship with the employer. Wages, benefits, access to services, disciplinary actions, other policies, including the payment of benefits for striking employments. So I don't think there's any argument that contracts, collective bargaining agreements, define within the collective bargaining unit the conditions under which an employee is working. And the conditions not meaning the working conditions, but the rules by which they're held between the employer and the employee. And they're negotiated, hopefully in good faith, between the employer and the employee. These agreements even go on to define when someone can strike, when they can say, I don't agree with this. And there are provisions in there that define what a strike would look like, and the Labor Act defines what a dispute is. I think there was a question earlier. So, you know, Section 561 of the Connecticut statutes of the Labor Relations Act very clearly defines what a labor dispute is. So, if I'm understanding this and I'm following along correctly, going on a strike or deciding to not work, particularly in a collective bargaining unit situation, is a decision that is made by the members of that bargaining unit, not by the employer. So the members of the bargaining unit get together and they agree to go on strike.
Thank you, Senator Berthoud. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry that I wasn't quite sure what the question was. Could you repeat the question?
I wasn't asking a question. I'm just making a statement. I didn't.
I'm sorry. It looked
no,
like
that's all right. No, I'm sorry. I
That's why I
paused
was
for a moment just I do want to make sure I'm explaining this clearly in my own head. My apologies, Senator. I had not framed a question. Thank you, Mr. President, for the consideration. And I don't know that I'm going to have a question, Senator, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around what we're doing here. So, again, going on strike, a decision made by the collective bargaining unit, not by the employer. And employees in the collective bargaining unit make the conscious and deliberative decision to walk off the job. That's part of what is in the details of the contract that they negotiate with their employer. Maybe it's a disagreement over the negotiations. It's a disagreement over the benefits. It's a disagreement over wages, working conditions. Whatever it is, it's part of what is guaranteed when you have a collective bargaining unit. But I think it's important that the distinction is made here, that the decision is made by the employee, not the employer, to go on strike. Again, whatever the conditions are, the collective bargaining unit takes up a vote to say, we are going to walk off the job. We're going to stop working. And because of that, when I look at the unemployment statutes for the state of Connecticut, people who do that, employees who do that, are not eligible for unemployment by definition. And then let's just take this to the other piece that the proposed legislation goes to. You don't have to be in a bargaining unit to walk off a job. If Senator Martin and I are working and we decide and we're not in a collective bargaining unit, we decide we're going to stop working because we don't like that something that's going on, we can walk off the job. We don't have to be in a union to do that. But if we are working for an employer, let's say, that has shut down, and we saw a lot of that during the last 24 months with this terrible pandemic that we were living through and the whole world went through. We saw businesses that closed. We saw businesses that were forced to close. Not a single person in that situation was denied an unemployment benefit. As a matter of fact, we went to extraordinary measures to make sure that we took extra care of people who were displaced because their businesses were closed. This body took up that initiative and made sure that we took care of people who were displaced because their employer was shut down, whether they were shut down because of an executive order or they were shut down because the economy just wasn't allowing them to stay open, or maybe a combination of both. Someone who is walking off of a job, who is able and willing to work and covered by a contract, should not be eligible for unemployment. The decision to not work is that of that employee. So allowing them to collect unemployment it's illogical, and it seems fundamentally wrong. Allowing striking workers to collect unemployment benefits does not align with the original purpose of the Unemployment Insurance Trust Act and unemployment benefits. It does not align with that purpose. Striking workers choose to leave the workforce, and because they are striking, they are not readily available to work. That is one of the tenets of being able to collect unemployment. You have to be ready to go back to work. And they're not, because they're on strike. That's not being ready to work. Being readily available and able to work is a requirement of collecting unemployment benefits. The Department of Labor Commissioner Bartolomeo testified against this bill, and she stated that the changes in this bill may affect the solvency of the Unemployment Trust Fund, and there's been some comments that have already been made about this. The Connecticut Business Industry Association, Connecticut's largest business organization, testified against this bill. They stated that the state unemployment system and trust fund are important social safety nets that have proven critical in recent years, particularly in the last 2 years, as I already spoke to. The system is funded exclusively by employers for the purpose of ensuring workers that become unemployed through no act of their own have a safety net. Striking workers are not working because they chose not to work. They chose not to work. It is not a fault of their own. Unemployed workers eligible for unemployment must be available for work. Striking workers are not available to work. Unemployed workers must be actively seeking another job while receiving benefits. Striking workers are not without a job. They're on strike from their current job. And if you look at the statistics, the Unemployment Insurance Fund is currently indebted with loans to the value of $555 million, plus more than $350 million in interest and credit reductions. And in November of this year, business taxes will increase on employers until this debt is satisfied. This is not the first time we've had this problem in Connecticut. When we combine this scenario with the next increase in the minimum wage, the increased cost of health insurance, the increased cost of energy, the highway taxes that are coming on the delivery of everything in the state of Connecticut, and this unprecedented inflation that we're seeing in the last 12, 16 months in general, this will result, policy like this will result in yet another increase in prices, the cost of living, and the difficulty of the middle class to stay in Connecticut. When does it stop? When does this assault on the middle class stop? When will we recognize that these policies are destroying our economy and further toxifying the business climate in Connecticut? I would argue that we are in a precarious time for our economy. We are awash in ARPA funds from Washington that we are collectively figuring out how to use and spend to presumably restart our economy and to help those who need our help. The longer-term reality is that in the next 18 to 24 months, we will likely see budget deficits and debate those deficits, those of us that are still here in the circle, that will be somewhere in the neighborhood of, $3, $4, $5 billion. Something we've never seen before. Policy like this amplifies this economic disaster we are facing. Again, increasing costs and eliminating jobs, good jobs that people might seek to get employed in. Mr. President, the Unemployment Trust Fund should be preserved for qualified individuals in need, particularly given its current lack of solvency. Mr. President, I am strongly opposed to this legislation, and I urge rejection. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Berthel. Further on, Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and through you, some questions to the good Madam Chairwoman of the Labor Committee.
Senator Kushner, prepare yourself. Senator Wong, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill just reminds me of my academic training in the School of Labor Relations, and one of the biggest fundamental classes that I enjoy learning in was a semester course on collective bargaining, the foundation of our labor relations dynamic. Through you, Mr. President, could the Madam Chair, who is a passionate labor advocate, could she explain in regards to collective bargaining the process in which the power is derived from the ability to negotiate, but also the ultimate aspect of the engagement, which is provided under statute and collective bargaining, of striking, and what that component encompasses, because that's a very powerful statement. And growing up in a labor household, I remember when there was a strike vote that was offered. It was a difficult vote because it encompassed an economic decision. It was an economic decision to say that if I choose to go on strike as an employee, I am going to invoke economic damage to your business. And in return, I recognize as a part of the collective bargaining relationship that I will suffer economic as well, because it's an equal playing field of collective bargaining. That if I am striking to prevent my services to you, I should also run the risk of losing my services of employment and income from my employer. Would that be correct through you, Mr. President, in being able to get the good Madam Chairwoman's perspective on collective bargaining and the exchange of political power or collective bargaining power through the process? Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Duff.
Thank you. Mr. President, would Senate stand at ease for a moment, please?
Senate will stand at ease. Senate will come back to order. Senator Duff.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I believe Senator Huang had a question to Senator Kushner. I'm going to yield to Senator Kushner to respond to the question.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. And through you, the question that was asked was lengthy about the labor relations and the practice of collective bargaining. And clearly, the good senator mentioned that he took a course in this for a semester, and I think it would be hard for me to describe the process or even confirm what you described as the process in the matter of minutes. Collective bargaining is a well-established practice under law in our country for not quite 100 years, but almost 100 years. And there's a tremendous amount of case law that has been developed to define what is a labor dispute and to also set all kinds of parameters around both economic strikes and unfair labor practice strikes. What I would say is that this bill the current statute already requires the Department of Labor to make a determination as to whether or not there is a labor dispute. When somebody makes a claim for unemployment and there is a labor dispute, the Department of Labor already has to make that determination, and they have to determine whether it's a strike or a lockout. That's an existing statute. All this does is say that if there is a labor dispute, that the unemployment benefits will become available after 2 consecutive weeks. So it does nothing to change the underlying determination of what is a labor dispute or the collective bargaining process.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Wong.
Through you, thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Mr. President, I think there was 2 points made by the good chairwoman, one about an unfair labor practice, the other one on a labor dispute. I think my question was, in her experience, her lengthy experience in collective bargaining processes, that there is a agreement in regards to the economic cost in regards to a strike. That is important, and it's a basic tenet of any agreement between employers and a labor union as a representative body, that you make a decision to utilize the strike provision. That is clear. This bill is addressing striking employees that after a 2-week period, they would be eligible for unemployment. It takes away the risk that is embodied in a collective bargaining process between an employer and an employee. My question again, this takes away the balance and the dynamic of any collective bargaining. You have taken away the risk, the economic risk that is essential to any collective bargaining has a leverage and negotiation posture. You, through this bill, as I understand it, is allowing the state and its unemployment insurance program to interject itself into a private collective bargaining matter. And through you, Mr. President, to the good Madam Chair, if the good Madam Chair and the proponent of this bill can explain otherwise, the unique dynamic of collective bargaining, which I vehemently support and am very familiar with, it is a private contract that's agreed to, and if it's disagreeable, they need to negotiate and settle it. The state of Connecticut, through this bill, as I understand it, is interjecting itself into a private collective bargaining agreement. through you, Mr. President, unless the good Madam Chair can explain otherwise through her expertise, through collective bargaining, that it is different, then please, I'd love to learn.
Thank you, Senator Wong. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really look at this in a very different way. To me, this bill levels the playing field for workers to be able to exercise their rights under federal law. And I think that's very important. To me, this is a bill that will enhance the ability of workers to fully exercise their rights, as we've described, that have been in existence for nearly 100 years. And you know, it was discussed earlier that this exists in New York State, and that's true, it does. It was passed in 2020, and in fact, workers in New York State now can collect unemployment when they're on strike after 2 weeks. Exactly what we're proposing here. And I think that I view it very differently. I'm not surprised, but from my perspective, this is a bill that will help build the middle class in Connecticut, that will help give workers the opportunity to exercise their rights as defined under federal law.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Huang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good to see you up there as well, sir. I thank the good Madam Chair for her explanation, but she said something very important. The right to strike has existed for hundreds of years, and it has. That's the great beauty of our labor relations dynamic and collective bargaining. You can strike, but it is a calculated economic risk. It is an agreement between employer and employee that the employee says, I am withholding my services and you will suffer economic challenges to your business, and I will assume the risk of withholding my services and enduring the risk of lost income so that I can negotiate with you. It's a private matter. I don't know how New York continues to do it, but we're in Connecticut. And to me, this is an encroachment into private business matters between a labor and employer. The right to strike is essential and elemental, but the same element of striking requires risk. This bill interjects government and the Unemployment Compensation Fund to offset that risk, to take away the element and measure of striking. I still remember the day when there was a strike vote in my family. My parents had to take one, and it was a calculated risk that they would be going without income. But they believed in that moment. They believed in their agreement. They were willing to take that risk. And so through you, Mr. President, I don't believe the good Madam Chair offered her perspective, because if we're going to interject the unemployment and state funds and federal funds into this matter, what is to say that we don't interfere on captive audiences? Because that's wrong too. Can go both ways in this idea. Would she be offended if businesses interjected on an employee's right to unionize? I would hope not. I don't support that. So through you, Mr. President, would the good Madam Chair explain how we would now authorize in statute a third party engaged in a collective bargaining agreement between two entities with an outside third party? Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Kushner, will you reply?
Through you, Mr. President. I think that as state government and also federal government, we set many laws and create many statutes that govern the relationships between private employers and employees. And does not go beyond what I think our responsibility is to make sure that we are providing the opportunity for workers in our state to have a fair opportunity to exercise their rights under federal law. And I think this bill moves us in that direction. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Huang, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the good Madam Chair for her answer. I guess we're going to disagree on this matter, because here's the challenge I have. In taking that course, it was one of my favorite courses ever taken. I learned so much, and I have so much respect for the labor relations and employer dynamic. Collective bargaining is an incredible right, but it's negotiations between two parties. I'd be curious that if we were in another state, so far different than the Northeast states, and if there was a unionizing effort, and the state got involved and said, you know what, we're gonna have captive audience, we're gonna keep businesses and be able to take meetings and all that. You know what, it would be an unfair labor practice. Be an unfair labor practice. We're protected against these kind of encroaching, uneven applications. We're not going to agree on this debate, but I think it's really important for us to note this bill in the state of Connecticut, not New York, is crossing a line between an employer-employee relationship, a private relationship. And that's a very dangerous line in my mind to cross over. And it could work both ways. It could work both ways. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to move on through you, Mr. President. My second question to the proponent of this bill is, how does, and maybe she knows it and many people know it, but just for edification and clarification, through you, Mr. President, how does the Connecticut Unemployment Insurance Program work? How is it funded? What is its explicit and descriptive service and purpose? Through you, Mr. President, to the good Madam Chair of Labor. And I'll repeat again. How does the Connecticut Unemployment Insurance Program work? How is it funded? And what it is stated purpose? And having read the testimony from the interim or now current commissioner of the Department of Labor, I wanted to ask the good Madam Chair of the Labor Committee, who held these public hearings, to explain, how does the Connecticut Unemployment Insurance Program work? How is it funded, and what is its purpose? Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Huang. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, nothing in this bill changes the way that the Connecticut Unemployment Insurance Program works, except that it does change the fact that after 2 weeks, consecutive weeks, in a labor dispute, a worker would be eligible for unemployment. But nothing otherwise changes the underlying statutes and doesn't change in any way the way the unemployment program works in the state of Connecticut. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Huang, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President, it does change the program because we've added a new component. It may be an interpretation point, but it does change the program. It alters it in regards to its liability. But that being said, through you, Mr. President, I didn't get that, how it was funded, and the regular funding and also the ARPA funding to the COVID pandemic that we endured. How is the Connecticut Unemployment Compensation Fund funded? Through whose contribution? Employers? Employee contributions? Federal money? Through you, Mr. President, how is it funded?
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, nothing in the bill that is proposed here and that we're voting on today changes anything about the way the unemployment insurance program is funded. Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Huang.
Through you, Mr. President, I understand it doesn't change it, but I'm just trying to understand and learn for legal intent that is the funding through employer contributions, employee contributions, federal money, state money? Could the good Madam Chair explain, even though it hasn't changed, please explain to me how it's funded. Is it through employers, employees, federal, or state?
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, this bill does not change or alter the way that the funding comes to the Unemployment Trust Fund. Through you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Huang.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. President, I'm not on the Labor Committee, but I've had the experience of helping many constituents through the COVID pandemic where many lost their jobs. Unbeknownst to their efforts, and they had requests for the Unemployment Compensation Fund. Absolutely essential. And I do believe that it is funded by employee, no, it's by employer contributions. It is done by employer contributions as part of a deduction, not employees, that during this pandemic and during the 2008 economic crisis, the state of Connecticut fund ran dry, and we had to borrow money from the state, from the federal government, that ran up a significant deficit to be able to meet the important needs of people who lost their jobs. Not by their doing. Here's a key element. People who lost their jobs, not by their doing. And we provided funds from the employer and borrowed money from the federal government to fund this very important program for employees who lost their job outside of their control. We are currently in a deficit of nearly $1 billion because of the COVID pandemic, because of many employees who lost their jobs, not of their doing, not of their choice. And that deficit owed to the federal government, incurred and burdened and obligated by employers, will continue to grow, not only on the current debt, but on the interest rate that's being charged. But let me repeat again, and I repeat often, I guess, perhaps. It is to support employees who lost their jobs, not of their choice and doing. So the answer I was looking for, and if I'm wrong in that funding mechanism and the purpose, the good Madam Chair could correct me, because that has not changed. But what this bill does now is add a new equation to this. That individuals, that is part of a collective bargaining agreement, who is in a process of saying, I don't like this agreement. And as part of my negotiations and my right, under the rights incurred or offered by over 100 years, as the good Madam Chair said, I can go on strike. But it is a risk. It's an economic risk, like I said before. What this bill is saying, we're going to have a program that's funded by employers, borrow money from the federal government to now supplement this collective bargaining disagreement, that the labor will decide to go on strike And after 2 weeks, you will be able to receive money from the unemployment insurance program that was purposely structured to help people who lost their job by no intent or means of their own. Very different from a collective bargaining agreement in which you disagree and chose to go on strike. You chose to withhold your services as a negotiation posture to get a better agreement with your employer. And we run the risk of increasing further liabilities that upends the balance between collective bargaining, employer and labor relationships, and puts the risk even greater onto our already struggling Connecticut businesses. So we can argue all night and have a disagreement, but to me, I had to raise this point that as I learned through the class and I understand the dynamic, the greatness of this country, the greatness of our labor relations movement, the labor movement, which I am a huge, huge historian and supporter of, is upended by this bill, one by collective bargaining, balance, the interjection of state government into a private labor relations agreement, and number two, adds an already overburdened and heavily indebted unemployment compensation program. And unless the good Madam Chair explained and changes differently as I understood how it's funded, it's an uneven funding mechanism. It's the employer, and it is the state that will borrow the money. Where is the balance of collective bargaining? Where is the risk of that economic strike? What's going to prevent people from striking? Because there's no downside after 2 weeks. There is no economic risk to that calculus anymore. Truly undermining the real intent of what collective bargaining and negotiations and risk assessment is all about. So I urge defeat of this bill. I wish there was a better way to be able to get labor peace and have a collaborative labor relations dynamic. But this is one that's far too big of a reach, and it interrupts a real unique balance that we have in American history, American labor history, of interjecting state government and interfering with private business matters. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. President, and I want to thank the good Madam Chair for her time and effort on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Summers.
Yes, good evening, and thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a few questions through you to the proponent of the bill, and I do apologize if these have already been answered today. I have been in and out of meetings. As far as the bill is concerned, it's my understanding that this bill applies to not only unionized but non-unionized employees. Through you, Mr. President, is that correct?
Thanks, Senator Summers. Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, this change in statute would apply to any workers involved in a labor dispute as determined by the Department of Labor.
Thank you for that answer. And through you, Mr. President, to the proponent of the bill, I was wondering if there is a limit in the size of the company, how large or small the company must be for this bill to apply.
Thank you, Senator Summers. Senator Kushner.
Through you, Mr. President, there is no limit.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Summers, you have the floor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. President, I would like to ask the proponent of the bill, it's my understanding from listening that if an employee decided to strike, whether it be 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how many are interested in or have a labor dispute, and strike, the first 2 weeks they would not be compensated, but after the 2 weeks. If there was not a resolution, then they would be eligible for to collect unemployment from the state of Connecticut. And I would like to ask the proponent, for how long would they be able to collect unemployment through you, Mr. President?
Thank you, Senator Summers. Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, this change in statute would allow persons who are involved in a labor dispute as determined by the Department of Labor to collect unemployment benefits after 2 consecutive weeks. It does not change any other aspects of the timing of the unemployment, how long they would receive it. It is whatever they would be entitled to under our current statute.
Thank you, Senator Kushner. Senator Summers, you have the floor.
So under our current statute, how long would they be able to collect unemployment through you, Mr. President?
Senator Kushner.
I would have to check, through you, Mr. President, I would have to check with the Department of Labor. I mean, there are times when there are extended benefits. I don't know that that would apply, so I can't give you an answer right now.
Okay, thank you. I do have a few comments. So the first comment that I would like to make is, when I was thinking about this bill, I was thinking about family-owned businesses. And if I owned a business with my husband and my children, and there was a dispute over whatever it may be, because there doesn't seem to be a criteria here for that they could potentially go on strike, and I, as the business owner, would be assessed at a higher rate for my unemployment because there has been this strike and or labor dispute, which I find insulting for every small business in the state of Connecticut. I also represent one of the largest defense contractors we have here in the state of Connecticut, in my district in Groton, Connecticut, and they are appalled at this bill. They undergo negotiations for their union, and they also have some non-union employees. I myself had a manufacturing company in the state of Connecticut with over 100 employees. It was not a union shop. My employees were happy. If there was a dispute, we were able to resolve it. And I can say honestly and directly that I truly believe the state of Connecticut has no business being in the middle of an employee and the employer. And the one thing that we hear collectively over and over from the people that are the job creators in this state, from the people that are providing opportunities for employment in this state, is to leave them alone. This is the most anti-business bill that I have seen in probably my time here, besides some of the other shift bills that we have. I don't know why we insist on meddling between an employer and an employee in the state of Connecticut. If you are an employee that is unhappy in your position, there are job postings everywhere. You can certainly move with your feet, and right now, employers are desperate for employees. Just to give you an example on the defense contractor that I happen to represent, we have a whole workforce manufacturing training system to try to feed them employees, to try to help provide opportunity for the employers that we have here in the state of Connecticut to stay here in the state of Connecticut. So on one hand, we're trying to help, and this bill just hurts. It hurts in the fact that the government is sticking its nose where it doesn't belong. We have collective bargaining agreements that this would violate on some level. We have small businesses that, if their employees aren't happy, do everything they can to make them happy, to make them stay. We have a very high cost of doing business here in the state of Connecticut. And I find this bill absolutely outrageous as an employer, as somebody who has actually had a business and had employees. And one other question I had through you, Mr. President, for the proponent of the bill. If I'm a small company and I have 100 full-time employees, and they decide that they have a labor dispute with me because they don't like the fact that maybe I'm instituting a policy that they have to wear a specific uniform. And they go out on strike. And it lasts quite some time because I'm not going to move. And they're not going to move. They're getting paid. I'm not. I'm losing every day because I can't produce my product. If I bring new workers in to fill those positions, do I have the ability then to say goodbye to the 100 that striked? Through you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Summers. Senator Kushner, would you respond?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sorry, Senator Summers, would you please repeat that question?
The question is...
Senator Summers.
Yes, through you, Mr. President. If I decide as an employer that my people are going on strike, I'm not unionized, we have all these laws in the state of Connecticut about when we can hire, when we can fire, how we fire, is it documented in the system? If they decide to go out on strike, I'm going to have to now pay a larger fee every year into my unemployment fund. I remember getting that years ago. Can I now say, you know what, I'm terminating all of you and I'm going to replace you? Through you, Mr. President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator, for repeating it. I apologize. There's people texting me. I know that shouldn't happen here, and I apologize. There are federal laws that do allow, under certain circumstances, for workers to be terminated when they're engaged in a strike. So it would depend entirely on the particulars of that labor dispute.
Thank you for that answer. I would urge people in this circle to think about what message this sends to businesses that are currently here, some of our largest employers in the state of Connecticut, and businesses that are thinking of coming here or have thought of coming here to the state of Connecticut. When they see time after time, bill after bill, that is encroaching on their ability to make their own decisions for their ability to negotiate with their employers, with employees, without the state of Connecticut sticking its nose under the tent, this makes Connecticut a very, very unattractive state to want to come to. And we have a lot of things going against us besides this particular bill. I will repeat that since New York passed this legislation, it has had the largest job losses ever on record. Since New York passed this legislation, it has had the largest job losses ever. Consider that when you cast your vote. And I thank you for your time tonight, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Summers. Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Cabrera.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the bill. I want to thank the good Madam Chair Kushner for raising the bill. I've been sitting back, Mr. President, the last couple of hours listening to the debate and the conversation. And Senator Kushner had mentioned, as an example, the Stop and Shop strike. Well, I was part of that strike. I was on those picket lines every day for 11 days. I spoke to those families. I was at their kitchen table. The reality is, going on strike is not an easy decision. It's probably the most difficult decision workers have to make. That's why it's so rare. In fact, in Connecticut, we've only had 2 major strikes in the last 20 years that impacted us. So the reality is that going on strike is a very difficult decision for workers. It impacts their lives, it disrupts their families. It has a direct impact on their ability to live at a certain level. So it's not something that's taken lightly. I was dismayed and a little frustrated with the tenor of the conversation because it seemed like this was a flippant decision. It's not. As someone who's been doing this for 25 years, trust me, it is a difficult decision, a hard decision, not something that's taken lightly. The fact is most workers want to work. Most workers want to put in a good day's work for a decent pay. The reason why we're seeing some of the movement in this country, laborers walking on their own, whether it's Amazon or Starbucks, is because this pandemic has shown how incredibly unfair oftentimes we are towards workers, the men and women who get up every day and work hard and make our businesses run. And we're not trying to put anyone out of business. That's antithetical to what we're trying to do here. We're wanting to make sure that workers are treated decently, that they have options, that they are well cared for at work. And the fact is, most employers do that. This is not an anti-employer, anti-small business bill. This is a pro-worker bill. This is a bill that the same workers we all stood up, and I did as well, during this pandemic, the same workers we called heroes and held signs out and celebrated them because they went to work during this pandemic, many of them catching COVID, bringing it home. Many of them died, doing jobs, quite frankly, that most people don't want to do. That's what this bill is about. It's rare for workers to go on strike. The fact is, these are families, the same men and women who help our economy run, the same men and women who've kept our economy running through this pandemic. And all this bill does is include them, that they have a voice, that they have more leverage at work, not because they want to get free money and not work. They do. They just want to be treated with some dignity and respect, and this bill expands that benefit to them. So for that reasons and all the reasons I enumerated, Mr. President, I hope that when we vote today that we think of those workers, the ones we celebrate all the time and the ones that work so hard to keep this economy going, and I will be voting yes, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. President.
Will you remark further?
Will Senate stand at ease for a moment, please?
We'll stand at ease. Senator Duff.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to yield to Senator Kushner.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move Madam President, the clerk has an amendment, LCO number 4640. Will the clerk please call the amendment?
LCO number 4640, Senate Schedule B.
Thank you. Madam President, I move adoption of the amendment and move to waive the reading. I would seek leave of the chamber to summarize.
The senator asks leave of the chamber to summarize. Is there objection to the summarization? Hearing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. This amendment will change the effective date of this legislation to July 1st, 2024.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
This is a very simple amendment that just pushes out the date of the effective date of this bill to July 1st, 2024, and it changes nothing else within the bill as proposed.
Will you remark? Will you remark? Senator?
Thank you, Madam President. I did not hear the good chairman of the Labor Committee move adoption of this amendment.
Would you move adoption of the amendment, Senator?
Move adoption.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark? Senator?
Thank you, Madam President. Sorry, I don't want to speak without having your permission. I just have a couple of questions on the amendment, if I might. It seems to me that when we first began our debate on the bill before us, Senate Bill 317, an act concerning unemployment for striking employees, that the original effective date in the underlying bill was October 1st, 22, so just a few months from now. And the very first thing that was done out of the gate was to move an amendment changing that effective date to January 1st of 2023. I wasn't certain why that was happening, but I did support that amendment. And as I remarked earlier today, it's because I do not like this policy. I think this is a very dangerous policy. We went through that at some length, and so have my colleagues over the past few hours. So I certainly don't object to prolonging a bad policy from going into effect. And I feel somewhat like that now, because now we are being presented another amendment that will move the effective date to July 1st of 2024. And I guess the first question I would ask, Madam President, to the chairman is what is the reason for the additional date change? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Madam President. I think that during the debate, we listened to what our colleagues were saying and decided that it would be better if we changed the effective date of this to July 1st, 2024. Through you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I appreciate that we were listened to, and but I'm still I don't really understand. In what way would the policy change being effective in 2024 versus January 1st, 2023, that would improve the situation? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Madam President. I think it's clear that we were listening to the debate, and after hearing from folks, we thought it would be better to move the date to July 1st, 2024. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Okay, so I appreciate that very much, and I don't disagree, because I will reiterate that this is very bad policy. And if anyone was listening, I think they would understand this is very bad policy. But the position of the majority has to be that this is good policy. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here debating it and preparing for a vote. So I don't really understand why someone would say something is good policy that should be effective on October 1st, 2022, but no, January 1st, 23, and no, it would be even better if we waited for 2 years. If it's good policy, if it's good policy. If it's not good policy, it's not good policy. And I will just state that it should be obvious to anyone listening that it has become clear during this debate just how bad this policy is. I think the majority is blinking, for lack of a better term, because they know that this is a bad policy, and they're concerned about the ramifications, and moving the effective date into the future lessens the immediate damage. But I'm hopeful that the people of Connecticut were watching this debate and understanding the differences in how we perceive the state of Connecticut and the relationship between employers and employees, and our definitions of fairness, as I remarked earlier today. I'm going to support the amendment, Madam President, because why not? And in fact, I will take some credit for the amendment, because I'm very pleased that the effect that we had on this debate today, myself and my fellow Republican colleagues, bringing to attention the major pitfalls of this policy, has caused this change to delay its implementation for 2 years. But it doesn't make it good policy. It'll still be bad policy 2 years from now. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Senator Champagne.
Thank you, Madam President. I stand in opposition of this bill, and no matter what date it is, this is going to affect every business in Connecticut. It's going to affect them negatively. I don't know if this date was moved to get it away from the election or what the reason for it, because I didn't hear a good enough reason. This is bad policy. And voting for this is voting against businesses. Any business, whether it's a small business or a large business. A municipality, they're in the same boat. This is going to affect everybody the same, and it's a negative effect. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further? Will you remark further? If not, the machine will be open for a vote. No? No vote? I'm sorry, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam President. I think we can do this on a voice vote.
Thank you. Sorry.
Senator Sanides for a
I'd like
moment.
to try your minds.
Hold on. Senator Sanides for a moment, please, Madam President. We all right? Madam President, yeah, a voice vote would be fine. Thank you.
I'd like to try your minds. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Opposed. The amendment carries. The ayes have it. Thank you. Will you remark further on the bill as amended? Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise for some conversation and perhaps a few questions for the proponent of this bill.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Kushner, would you prepare yourself, madam?
Thank you, Madam President. You know, I am continually dismayed at what the Labor Committee puts in front of us year after year in an effort, in their minds, I guess, to try to help the employees. But I think what's missing in a lot of these things is what happens to the employers. The employers who create the opportunity, who take the chances, both financially, emotionally, physically, with their families all involved, to establish a business which is generated from their passion, to try to find a way to make a living, and to do that, if the business grows, they need employees. And as was said by the good senator to my left, most businesses treat their employees very well. I think a wide majority of businesses treat their employees very well. Because as a small business myself for the last 39 years, as someone who has had employees over that time, I realized that I could not have had the opportunities that I had without their help, without the opportunities that I provided to them to get good paying jobs, to be able to provide for their families, for the many single moms that I have working for me, raising their kids. Now they're able to buy cars, buy homes, establish themselves in the community, enjoy their grandchildren. And yet, time after time, we have to worry about what's happening here around this circle and in this building about the assault on small business. Now, I understand there are some people out there that don't treat employees right. I understand that there are large companies that are unionized. Some smaller companies are unionized. And they have a collective bargaining process through which they negotiate their benefits, their wages, their work conditions, and they come to a meeting of the minds and decide how to best move forward to keep the business going, to keep the paychecks coming, to keep the taxes being paid to the state of Connecticut and the federal government. And so when I see bills like this that to me may be well-intentioned, and this file copy 249 that I'm looking at, this is all current statute. This is all current law with the exception of the bracketed items that are included in this bill. Through you, Madam President, would that be correct?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. The only changes within file copy 249 that are not, the only things that are not current law are the things that are underlined and bracketed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you, Madam President. So I want to note in here a few things. In current statutes in the state of Connecticut, there is a definition for labor dispute. And if I may, Madam President, that labor dispute is identified in statute by saying, labor dispute, in quotations, includes but shall not be restricted to any controversy between employers and employees or their representatives concerning terms, tenure, or condition of employment, or concerning the association or representation of persons in negotiating, fixing, or maintaining or seeking to negotiate, fix, maintain, or change terms or conditions of employment. That's the definition that we're going by in statute. None of that says it's entirely targeted and related to just unionized employees. Doesn't say that in here. This identifies a labor dispute. So any small business, whether you're a small pizza place, a small retail place, a small manufacturing opportunity that has a disagreement, or it's in this words a controversy between an employer and employee, whether they're unionized or non-unionized, would be classified as a labor dispute. And therefore, under this law, they would be entitled to get compensation if they took that labor dispute and they decided not to work for 2 weeks. That's how I read the bill. Through you, Madam President, I'm wondering if that's the intent of the bill as written through the good chair of the Labor Committee.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, the definition that was just read is, as I understand, as I'm looking at it as well, covers the chapter that was stated, and so it would be, I'm sure, part of the consideration for the Department of Labor when they determine whether or not there's a labor dispute in determining the eligibility for unemployment. And I do agree that it does not require that the workers are affiliated with any particular labor organization. They could form their own labor organization. They could take that kind of action, and it could be considered a labor dispute if it met all the criteria by the Department of Labor. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. So from what I think I heard you say was that this would be a much broader application than perhaps the committee intended, that employees, whether they're unionized or non-unionized, there's no number or limit, could declare a labor dispute, sit out for 2 weeks, and then decide to collect unemployment. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't believe it's any, we did not, in consideration of this bill, we did not require that it only apply or ever think and consider that it only apply to those people who have formed a union with a labor organization. It was always our intention that we would recognize, as the federal law does, that there can be a labor dispute, there can be a strike without any labor organization that is already existing. Workers can choose to go off the job and conduct a strike, and that is considered under federal law. It is prohibited. It is allowed under federal law, and that was what we were considering here when we decided to move forward this bill, that we wanted it to apply to any group of workers that chose to engage in a labor dispute.
Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. So if we have 2 ice cream servers, 2 retail employees at Stop and Shop, well, Stop and Shop is unionized, say at a small local health food store or a manufacturing, from what I'm hearing you say, that they are already able to create a labor dispute and they're subject to the rest of this bill, you're just adding for them the opportunity to go on to stay away from work for 2 weeks and then start collecting unemployment benefits if, in their minds and in the minds of the employer, the dispute has not been resolved. Am I understanding that correctly through you, Madam President?
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, I am simply saying that whatever the federal law currently provides as the rights of workers to engage in collective action and take a strike, or what is determined, what's talked about in statute as a labor dispute. Whatever the current statutes allow, they would continue to allow. The only thing we're changing here is whether or not, the only thing we're changing in statute is the right for employees who are engaged in a labor dispute after 2 weeks to collect unemployment. So if the Department of Labor makes a determination that it's a labor dispute, then those workers have the right to collect unemployment after 2 consecutive weeks on strike. So we're not changing anything under the current statutes except for that very limited piece of it. We're not broadening any employees' rights under federal law or under state law. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. It seems to me that the bill and the opportunity is overly broad, and I think that it's going to be harmful for many people in the state of Connecticut that operate businesses, and I think it's another attempt to try to inflict unionized restrictions on businesses who are not, at this point, unionized through policy here at the state of Connecticut. All right, I see that this is bracketed out here. So thank you for your answers. I'm not sure if I'll have any more questions. But this talks about line 92 to line 95, 2 consecutive weeks in which the administrator finds the individual's total or partial unemployment is due to the existence of some labor dispute. So my apologies, I do have a question on that. Through you, Madam President, what is total or partial unemployment, and how is that determined on unemployment? If they are off for 2 weeks, everybody's off for 2 weeks, let's say it's a huge strike, everybody's off, how do you figure who gets full and who gets partial? Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Through you, Madam President, I believe the way that this is written, it allows the administrator to make a determination as to whether or not a person's total or partial unemployment is a result of a labor dispute for 2 consecutive weeks. And I think the Department of Labor will be able to make that determination.
Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. And it seems a bit cloudy to me, but on how they would be able to determine that, but I guess they have rules. And then each employer has an experience with employees, and part of that unemployment trust fund is paid for by employers based on a modification rate, whether they have a lot of people going to use the fund or whether they've been pretty good and they don't have a lot of people that's using the unemployment. So through you, Madam President, would the modification rate on businesses be affected if an employee goes on strike for 2 weeks and then they're out for another 6 weeks while they're negotiating their benefits or whatever reason they chose to go out on strike? Would the monies paid through the unemployment fund affect negatively the modification rate for the businesses, even though those businesses didn't choose to lay them off or create this? It was a negotiated impact. Through you, Madam President.
Senator Kushner.
Thank you, Madam President. Nothing in the proposed bill changes anything with regard to the calculation of the experience rate or the obligation of the employer. It is limited. It is strictly changing when a person qualifies for unemployment. So it doesn't, nothing in the existing statute has changed. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Formica.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator. So it would seem to me that through the opportunity to collectively bargain, one of the detriments for the employer would be a raise in modification rate, which will cost him or her further dollars down the road because the modification rate stays up and it it causes increases in workers' compensation insurance policy premiums as a result of that use. And you say nothing is changing that, so it would seem the more they use it, the more opportunities they're going to have to increase their costs down the road by the cost increase on the insurance policy at renewal as a result of the increased modification. We heard talk around the circle today already, Madam President, about the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which goes back many, many years. The conversation talked about some years ago when it was in huge deficit. We had to borrow a lot of money from the federal government, and the employers around the state, both small and large, got an assessment for thousands of dollars to help pay off that federal note. The Unemployment Trust Fund, from where these benefits are going to come from, was pretty much insolvent before the pandemic, and I don't believe has any money in the bank now. I'm not quite sure of that, but it's got very little. And I think we owe still now the federal government hundreds of millions of dollars. And yet this bill would go to put more pressure on that. Madam President, nursing homes have struggled for years. There have been strikes at nursing homes. I think we've all come together to try to find a way to fix that, because we, as a community, as a state, need good quality care for those people who need to get into nursing homes. I have some serious concerns on whether nursing homes will be able to withstand a bill like this, being closed for 2 weeks with employees knowing that they get paid by the union to be out for those 2 weeks, stipends, and then that they can continue to collect unemployment or begin to collect unemployment after week 2. I think this would be detrimental to many businesses, but I'm especially concerned about how nursing homes will be able to handle that, how replacement workers will be able to be accessed and come in. We can't find workers now. So I have some concerns about that. This bill, and I heard around the circle earlier that it's the employees are suffering and that they need to put food on their table, and I have sympathy with that. I understand that. And we heard Senator Wong talk about the opportunities of collective bargaining, and that's negotiation, and we're willing to take this stand, and the employer is willing to take that stand, and that's impasse. And there are fortunes that go with that, and there are detriments that go with that. But Madam President, this bill rewards the employees for staying out longer, but it incurs a greater hardship on the business, because this, in effect, is assisting the negotiations for the labor side by giving them the opportunity to withstand staying away from the business in which they work. And the business doesn't have any opportunity to recoup or have that same opportunity to be even. So this seems to be tipping the scale to me and interrupting the collective bargaining price and not making really a level playing field. Madam President, we all know the challenges that have happened over the last few years. It's not news. There have been both physical challenges to our health, to our families. There have been emotional challenges. We see the effects of this pandemic have had on domestic violence. There's been financial challenges. People have been out of work. Businesses have had to close. never to reopen. And now as things start to get back to normal, and we're getting through those challenges, we find we're saddled with more challenges, the challenges of inflation. Prices are rising at an incredible rate. The only one who seems to be benefiting from inflation is the state of Connecticut's budget, where the revenues have exceeded by $700 or $800 million because we've over-collected our expected tax collections, because the price of inflation has risen the cost of goods and services, and sales taxes put on top of those costs. So when we did the budget last year, we figured the expenditures, we estimated the revenues, we balanced the budget. Bipartisanly, we all voted for that. But now, because of these price increases, the sales tax dollars are coming in, and while there's been some agreement around, I think, this building to try to give some tax relief, we really only gave a very small amount of deduction of 25 cents on a gas tax, and that ends June 30th, along with some bus rides and some clothing exemptions. But the fact of the matter is that businesses are still suffering through that. The supply chain is not what it was 2 years ago. It's difficult to get product. It's difficult to get employees. In fact, some years, maybe a year or two ago, Senator Kushner and I had a debate about minimum wage. And it was my contention that minimum wage should be based on market conditions, and that everybody deserves a living wage. I've been an employer for 39 years here in this state, and I have always prided myself on working with my staff to make sure that everybody gets what they need. But today, you can't get an employee for what the minimum wage rate is now. You have to pay $2 or $3 higher to that. So the market condition is controlling what's going on. And I think I say that, Madam President, because I believe it's up to the market condition, the entrepreneurial spirit of the people who start businesses that work hard with and for their employees to provide goods and services to their community. I think they're the ones who should determine what's going on. I think in all of my years, I laid off one person one time. And we talked a little bit about the cost of the unemployment insurance as a result of using the unemployment trust fund, and it rises and cost premium increases for the business. But this will just make this worse, in my view, Madam President. I think this is not a direction that this state needs to go. I sympathize with employees that are out of work, but employees that are out on strike because of a dispute are going to come back typically with more resources given to them, not less, more benefits given to them, not less. And yet this just gives them an opportunity to tip the scales. So I don't believe this is a place for government to insert its power. I think things have been working fairly well in this department all along. So I would be opposed to this measure today, and I would urge my colleagues also to vote against this measure. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further on the bill as amended? Senator Dobb.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise in support of the legislation, and I want to thank Senator Kushner for her work on the bill and the Labor Committee, Representative Porter and others who have worked tirelessly. I want to thank Senator Cabrera for his efforts as well. Somebody who personally understands this issue working with many folks who have been laid off over time and seeing how tough and difficult it's been on the faces of many families across the state of Connecticut. Madam President, I look at this bill as with some other bills that we will hopefully take up before the session ends, as a matter of fairness, of helping to ensure that those who work day in and day out do their best, give it 100%, leave it all on the table before they finish their job, that they are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Frankly, Madam President, the reason why I think that this bill is important is because of what I saw in my own district just a few short years ago. I don't believe that this legislation is going to be about a mom and pop store with 8 employees who somehow 4 of them decide to walk off the job. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I do think it is the case for conglomerates that are no longer just a Connecticut company that have their headquarters here, or a company that may be a regional company, or a company that even is located somewhere in this country. Some of this is about companies that actually are headquartered in another part of the world. And we have the workers are our neighbors, our friends. We go into the stores and we say hello, and we know their names, we know their children. We know what's going on in their lives. They know about us. That's who we're trying to protect. Those are the ones who we want to make sure that if they do strike, that they have a little bit of it's an evenness, a sense of evenness and fairness for them, so that they can bargain in good faith. Madam President, what I saw when we had the Stop and Shop strike a few years ago, because I had a store, 3 stores in my district, 2 in Norwalk and 1 in Darien. And what I saw from those folks were folks who work very hard. Not one of them is rich because they work at some of these stores, at Stop and Shop. They're not making millions of dollars. They're not able to buy mansions. They're not able to have an unlimited budget. These are folks who work hard every day because they need to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head, and do what's best that they can, what they can do for their kids. That's who we're fighting for. And when I saw those folks picketing and marching because they wanted to make sure that their families had health care, because the conglomerate that owns those stores is not in the state, not in the region, not in the country, but somewhere around the other side of the world, and wouldn't bargain in good faith because they're trying to throw the families off of having health care. I thought it was important to fight for the families here in the state of Connecticut, to make sure they had the voice and the ability to bargain in good faith. And what I think this does is this helps them do that. Because what happens when you strike is that if you're lucky enough to have a union, you have the funding from the Union Trust Fund, but that runs out after a certain amount of time. So then it's advantage employer again. It's not a fair fight. You can't bargain in good faith because the employer's just waiting for that money to run out. And the employers will just say, you know what, we got to settle because I've got rent to pay, I've got a mortgage to pay, I've got kids who need to go on a field trip, I've got food bills I've got to pay, I've got health insurance I need, I've got a lot of expenses. I need to get back to work. So just please make an agreement. But thankfully, because of the hard work of folks who bargained, the families did not lose their health care. They did get a raise. And they were able to come to an agreement. But that was this time. That was after many weeks of not only the strikers being out there every single day, but people who were elected being out there every single day, putting pressure on the employer to come to an agreement. So, Madam President, I think this bill stands up for the very ones who we talk about in this circle all the time. This bill stands up for the people in this state, our friends, our neighbors, maybe even some relatives who work at some of these stores. I'd want to be associated with them. I don't want to be associated necessarily with somebody halfway around the world who doesn't even know any of the folks who work at these stores. So, Madam President, this bill is about fairness. This bill is about making sure that folks have that ability to bargain in good faith, and that we can stand up for them when they're fighting for wages and health care and retirement, all the things that make Connecticut a great place to live. And I urge support of this bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further on the bill as amended? Senator Kelly.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So I wanted to rise, and before I actually get into what I'm going to talk about with regards to the bill, I wanted to be clear on a couple of things. First, we had two amendments on this bill. One to push from 22 to 23, a second from 23 to 24. The reason being that the debate, that the majority was listening to the debate of the colleagues, and I wanted to be clear that the Republicans were not asking to put this off or to move it from 22 to 23 or from 23 to 24. We've made other points with regards to fairness and bargaining in good faith and retirement that have fallen on deaf ears. But we were not asking for that. Quite frankly, Republicans believe that we're in a General Assembly session in 2022. We have an unprecedented high inflation, the highest in 41 years. We got to go back to the first year of the Reagan administration before we had inflation at this amount. And we're looking for Connecticut relief for our families, our communities, our neighbors now. We're not looking at relief next year, the year after that. We'd like to have sustained relief, yes. But we want to pass legislation that helps people now. Kind of like when we talk about tax cuts. You know, we're looking at a sales tax cut, and thank God we're in a sales tax week that's, I'm going to say, limited to certain items. But we can do better than that. The sales tax relief and the gas tax relief and bus ride relief that was offered is temporary to the tune of about $100 million, and yet we know the budget is getting about $700 million in what I'm going to call an inflation windfall, where our citizens are overtaxed from the budget we passed, and there's a disagreement as to whether or not we can give that back. Now, the governor and the majority point to the fact that the ARPA rules say it's limited, but yet 16 other states, including states with Democrat governors, have returned money, have gone to federal court, have prevailed as it being unconstitutional, and it's now in a circuit court. We've asked the governor and our attorney general to join that, to fight for the Connecticut taxpayers and bring relief now, only to find out that it fell on deaf ears, much like a lot of the comments with regards to this bill. So we believe that this is a flawed bill to begin with. It's not conscientious. It wasn't well thought out. It's ill-conceived. But yet it's before us, even though it's not going to take effect for 2 more years. 2 more years, we're going to use precious time today in a short session when Connecticut families are struggling having difficulty making ends meet because the economy of Connecticut is not as strong as it could and should be, we're not going to face those issues and handle those and provide relief today. We're looking at something 2 years down the road. So now when we look at this, you know, we can't check common sense at the door. And when you look at this bill, what it's going to enable is it's going to create an issue where someone can have a dispute over working conditions, whether it's wages, hours, their compensation package with regards to retirement and health care. And if they have a dispute, and that could be as simple as walking in to the employer and saying, hey, I need a 50-cent raise. The employer may not have the capability to provide that. Now we have two people, we have a labor dispute. That person can now walk off the job voluntarily and get unemployment. Now there's an incentive to walk off the job. And what's the difference between that and someone who quits and wouldn't be able to get unemployment? The only difference is one would claim that there's a dispute, the other one may not, yet they may walk off the job because they aren't paid enough and they're going to go get a better job. But one of the problems with Connecticut, and I remember sitting next to good Senator Ed Gomes, who also represented the town of Stratford with me, where we would reminisce about what it was like to live in Connecticut in the 70s and 80s, back in a time in Stratford when you had employers like Sikorsky, like Raybestos, like Avco, and Cartech in Bridgeport, where if you didn't like what was going on in your employment and didn't like what the employer said, you could walk down the street, get hired, and oftentimes at better wages, better benefits, better retirement, better health care. Where's that Connecticut now? And why aren't we working on that Connecticut? No, instead, Connecticut is near dead last in job growth, near dead last in income growth. Connecticut is unaffordable, becoming more expensive and more unaffordable, and the majority is doing nothing. It's acceptable. And when they talk about relief for Connecticut families, it's 2 years from now. Families are struggling today. My constituents are telling me how hard it is to make ends meet. And this will bring relief in 2 years. I guess the message, loud and clear, is hold tight. So, yesterday was one of those types of days that we have all too often here in the Capitol, where individuals across our state of Connecticut come to their capital to address issues that our government is creating for them. I can appreciate the fact, as democracy, that this is a government of the people and for the people, by the people. And that the essential part of that is that people have the right and duty and obligation to participate in their government. And that's refreshing. And it's a principle that is so, it's a Connecticut principle, but something that is cherished around the world. But what's disheartening is when you find that that government isn't quite working for the people. So folks come to the Capitol to talk about how their government isn't working for them. And so yesterday was one of those days where we talked about how our state, during the pandemic, required businesses to close, and labor was put out of job. They didn't have a job to go to. And rightfully, our state then provided unemployment benefits and made sure that that unemployment benefit safety net was intact and was available for those individuals who lost their job. But those benefits come at a cost. The state required the businesses to shut down. They also made good on the safety net. They took a loan, and now it's time for that loan to be repaid. And what was unfortunate is that that's going to create a problem with regards to both jobs and pay raises going forward. We wonder why we're dead last in the nation in job growth and income growth. Well, it's because of policies like that and policies like this. It was the labor commissioner who pointed out that there was insolvency in that safety net line item. Insolvency. So what happens if there's no safety net and somebody loses their job? Then there's no help. So what about this? This is going to put more burden on that very system. I think that's what the commissioner was speaking to and was concerned about. But yet we're going to move forward nonetheless. Move forward. So despite its insolvency, we're going to add more burden. That burden is going to make it more difficult for people who look for work to find work, and to those who have work to get more money in their work. Those are two issues that are plaguing Connecticut: the creation of jobs and income growth. We're near dead last. But it's issues like this are the reason why we're in that situation, and why our families and why the people of Connecticut find our state unaffordable and find it difficult to make ends meet. It's simple kitchen table economics. When the cost of living goes up and I can't get better wages or a better job, I fall behind. And is that fair? Is that what people sent us, our constituents sent us to Hartford to do? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think they sent us here to make sure that our state performs for them. And that's what we need to do, but this bill doesn't accomplish that. Now, consistent with the fact that this is a flawed bill and it's not properly drafted, we hear about how this bill is going to help folks where the labor negotiation field is uneven. Conglomerates, big business. But yet it's not limited in scope to that. If that's what we're doing, then why isn't this limited to just those major companies, out-of-state, out-of-country companies? It's not. It's everyone who employs individuals. One of the concerns that I see is, what if the playing field is tilted the other way? What if you have, and I use in many times my example, a Mrs. McGillicuddy. Mrs. McGillicuddy who wants to just age in place. Here is an individual who has, raised the family, contributed to her community, done everything right, but because of the high cost of health care, has had to lean on the state. Maybe even have Medicaid, which would put her at a further disadvantage. because Medicaid doesn't pay dollar for the health care that's needed, provides health care at a discount, which makes Mrs. McGillicuddy's ability to compensate labor to be at a disadvantage. And if you look at the rates between a home care situation, a nursing home situation, and a hospital situation, you'll see that an individual gets paid most in the hospital, less so in a nursing home, and even less in the community. But yet Mrs. McGillicuddy, under that program, and even as a private individual, can hire folks to make sure that she has round-the-clock care. But if these individuals decide, you know what, I could do better, either at a nursing home or a hospital, they could complain about the wage. Mrs. McGillicuddy doesn't have the financial wherewithal because she's on Medicaid. And as a result, because of the market failure of government to adequately fund that program, you're now in a situation where labor can walk away, get compensated, and Mrs. McGillicuddy is now left without care. If it happens to happen on a holiday weekend, let's say it happens on Friday of this week, try to bring in aides on a holiday weekend, very difficult, if not impossible. And in today's economy, it's not unusual that there are no kids in the community or even in state. Many of our kids have left to go to Chicago or down south or elsewhere because the jobs in Connecticut aren't here. So what does that do? Now you have Mrs. McGillicuddy in an inferior bargaining position without the care that she desperately needs and at risk. Talk about fairness. Talk about good faith. Talk about health care and retirement. My God, Mrs. McGillicuddy is the one who needs the health care. It's her retirement, too. But yet what this would do is incentivize that labor from walking off, because they would be able to be compensated, maybe even look for a different job, making it more and more difficult for this population to age in place. Then we wonder why we have budget deficits, when we know aging in place costs about 1/3 the cost of a nursing home. It's what people want to do, and arguably the care at home is better. Every time I've walked out to a group and asked who wants to go to a nursing home, very few, if any, hands raise up and say, that's where I want to go. I thought I had to take her with Joel over there. But then, you know, that's what we're looking at here. The alternative would be institutional care. And do we really want to put individuals in that place? I don't think so. I don't think so. I get the idea of when you have a major company versus inferior employees from a negotiation and bargaining position, but that's not always the case. And this bill doesn't limit it to the major corporations who have the wherewithal to do that versus labor. This applies to everyone, wherever there's a labor dispute. And that dispute could be on hourly wages, anything, hours. There's a whole host of areas that could happen. So it's not the well-drafted bill that it's being portrayed to be. And I think there's serious flaws. And there's even ability to not have a 2-week waiting period if certain conditions are met, because that part of current law is not unchanged. So there may be the incentive for people to walk off a job, leaving somebody in a very difficult position, almost an unfair position. And there's lots of work that needs to be done on this. Lots of work. Given the fact of the work that's necessary and the fact it's 2 years away as an effective date, I don't know why we're doing it now. But we are, and so here we are. I would encourage my colleagues to look at this bill and think long and hard. It's a bill that's going to impact jobs in a state where job growth is very, very bad. We can do better than that. We must do better than that. But it's bills like this are the reason why we aren't doing better than that. This isn't good for individuals who are disabled or seniors, a group that I care deeply for and recognize the difficult place this bill will put them in. We don't have to go forward today. We need to think of that population too, because that's a population that is vulnerable and is worthy of our protection. For these reasons, Madam President, and the reasons that this is a poorly drafted bill that's being rushed with an effective date 2 years in the offing, I would certainly urge my colleagues to hit the pause button, if not the red one, and make sure that we don't adopt this, because I think the consequences overshadow the benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further on the bill as amended? Senator Looney.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening. Madam President, I rise in support of this bill for several reasons. First of all, the reality is that strikes are not undertaken lightly. It's not something that someone will casually walk off the job because of a minor dispute. There has usually been a long-standing, unresolved dispute that has been frustrating and has failed of solution before a strike is resorted to. Workers will still be without income for 2 weeks under this bill. And again, even with unemployment compensation, that is not full replacement income. So there will still be a financial loss to the workers here, although it will be cushioned somewhat from the stark nature of what it is now. So there really is no incentive to walk off a job here. And again, there is a significant loss. And when workers strike, it's knowing that they are going to suffer a short-term loss that in some ways will never be made up, in hopes for a long-term gain for the betterment of the work situation as time goes on. And also, Madam President, their opponents of this bill have talked about that it upsets the equal balance and equal bargaining power between workers and employers. And that's a fiction. Workers and employers generally have never been equal in bargaining power. The scales always tilt to the side of the employer who has greater resources. The reality is that anti-union advocates and anti-labor advocates have made that kind of argument to advance the fiction that government intervention to regulate wages or to regulate hours or to regulate working conditions somehow interferes with the bargaining rights of workers, as if those workers, unrepresented, were equal in terms of their capacity to negotiate with an employer. That has been a fiction that the Supreme Court operated under for many years until it began to be challenged in the middle years of the 20th century during the New Deal. But it's been a problem always, the idea that the right to bargain is being interfered with by government regulation. where there really was not ever a true right to bargain between parties with equal resources able to stand at arm's length in a true, fair, and equitable negotiation. So what this will do is only provide some benefits so that the stark consequences of having to undertake a strike because other methods have failed may not be quite as devastating as they currently are. But it's important also to keep in mind that strikes of duration of more than 2 weeks are quite rare. There have been very few documented in Connecticut over the last couple of decades. So it is not as if this is something that's going to apply in every work stoppage situation. It is simply a humane protection for workers and their families, and also meaning that they will still be able to participate even at a lower level in the economy. They will still be able to, we hope, be able to pay their rent because they'll have at least the unemployment comp, and it will be able to buy groceries. So this is something that will actually have a salutary effect in the economy of those communities where you may have a concentration of workers living who are affected by the same strike. And again, it is something that does not completely transform or replace our current system, but only provides a little bit more of equity to assist those who suffer most when there is a strike. That is, often workers who have done all they could in hopes of bargaining for a fair contract that has been neglected, or that has been rejected up to that time, and it just means that they will still suffer, but not quite as much if the strike goes beyond 2 weeks. So I would urge a passage of the bill. I want to thank Senator Kushner for her work and advocacy on this because it is a matter of equity. It's not a matter of suddenly turning over the scale so that every minor labor dispute is going to turn into a strike because workers are going to see it as a vacation. That's certainly not the case at all. It's still something to never be entered into lightly, and anyone who has ever lived in a family where the breadwinner was on strike knows that. And I experienced that as a child when my father was on strike a couple of times at the Winchester plant in New Haven. That was a traumatic time for our family, and no one undertakes that lightly. So I urge passage of the bill. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, sir. Will you remark further on the bill as amended? Will you remark further on the bill as amended? If not, the machine will be open for a vote. Mr. Clerk?
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. This is on the bill. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Substitute Bill number 317, an act concerning unemployment for striking employees, as amended by Senate Schedule A and B. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. This is on the bill. Substitute for Senate Bill number 317, an act concerning unemployment for striking employees, as amended by Senate Schedules A and B. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
machine will be locked.
What? Whoa, 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 whoa. I gotta read the damn thing.
Yeah, Mr. Clerk, will you please announce the tally?
Senate Bill 317 as amended by Senate A and B. Total number voting 32, total voting yea 19, total voting nay 13, absent not voting 4.
Bill passed.